Before Atlantis, something else drowned. You're standing on the edge of a cliff. Not a real one, don't worry. This one's older than gravity, carved from silence and forgotten memory. The air here doesn't move, it just waits. Far below, an ocean swells, and every wave whispers names you've never heard. Names no one remembers anymore. Because this isn't your history. It's something older, something that survived just long enough to be buried. Before the flood stories, Noah Gilgamesh, Deucalion, there were others. Other floods, other worlds. Some of them ended with fire, others with ice, but most ended with water. And not just water that drowns bodies, water that erases minds. See, if you're like most people, you probably think of history as a straight line, a timeline, march of progress, cute little stone tools, pyramids, Tesla, TikTok. But tonight, I want you to forget that line, because this story isn't a line, it's a whirlpool. One that pulls civilizations down over and over again, and you're floating right above it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to see who else is drifting through time with you right now. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. You shuffle through mist that smells like memory. The stones beneath your feet are warm, like they remember sunlight from a star that no longer exists. And the first name you hear is kalpa. You take a slow step forward, your feet now pressing against something strange. It's not rock, it's not sand. It feels like time, solid but somehow fragile. And in that moment, the first voice arrives, not a whisper, but a rhythm. Not a story, but a cycle. You've just entered the world of the kalpas. In Hindu cosmology, everything breathes. The universe itself has lungs. It expands, contracts, exhales, dies, and is born again, not once, but forever. Time here isn't just a measurement, it's a creature. And every day, it wakes, it builds a universe. Then it kills it. One day for this cosmic being, one day for Brahma, is 4 billion human years. Let that sit with you while your brain melts a little. Within that span, a kalpa, entire universes emerge and vanish like soap bubbles. Civilizations rise, achieve things beyond understanding, and then poof, gone. Not punished, not judged, just completed. Now imagine that the lost knowledge, the forgotten people, the cities that use stars as blueprints, all wiped out. Not because they did something wrong, but because time blinked. Historians still debate whether the kalpa myth was meant as literal cosmology or symbolic narrative. Either way, it's terrifying. Not in the run from the monster kind of way, but in the nothing you do matters for long kind of way. Even your best TikTok dance will be erased by divine entropy. Some texts say there are 14 manvantaras within each kalpa mini-cycles inside the big one. We're supposedly in the 7th, which, depending on your perspective, means we're either seasoned survivors or overdue for deletion. Here's the odd part. Many ancient cultures totally unrelated to Hinduism also speak of repeating floods, resets, and world ages. The Mayans had them. The Hopi had them. Even Plato suggested the earth gets cleaned out like a dirty fridge every so often. So maybe the kalpas aren't just mythology. Maybe they're a kind of trauma memory the human species can't quite shake. Let's say You're living in the final days of one of those cycles. There are signs, weather gets weird. Knowledge gets forgotten faster than it's created. People start building pyramids again, not out of stone, but out of data, out of paranoia. Maybe they bury libraries under mountains or encode survival guides into religious texts. Maybe someone even builds a massive clock that will tick for 10,000 years, but it's no use. When the cycle ends, everything goes. Cities are swallowed, languages are lost, and even memory has to start over. And then, someone wakes up. Someone climbs out of a cave, or a boat, or a dream, and it begins again. Now here's your weird fact of the night. There's an actual Hindu text that describes a city named Shambala, which is said to appear only at the end of a cycle when the world is rotten with confusion. It's not a paradise, it's a restart button. Some believe Shambhala is a metaphor. Others say it's a real place hiding in a fold of space-time, just waiting for the reset. Maybe you passed it on your commute once and didn't notice. So, what does that mean for you here now, curled under your blanket? Well, if kalpas are real, you're living in the final hours of a dream. And what you do next might matter, but not in the way you think. You're not here to save the world. You're here to remember it. And you can feel that, can't you? That sense that there's something you were supposed to recall, but someone pressed delete too soon. Here's something else they don't teach you in school. The Mahabharata. The great Indian epic doesn't just talk about gods and warriors. It casually mentions sky chariots, energy weapons, cities in the clouds, literal space opera written thousands of years ago. Historians still argue whether those descriptions were poetic symbolic or something else entirely. But if these stories came from the last kalpa, who's to say what's metaphor and what's archived history? Now picture it, a pre-flood civilization so advanced it had already unlocked the atom-tamed gravity or even merged with machine consciousness. But then the kalpa ended, and all that knowledge collapsed under the weight of water and forgetfulness. You can almost hear the echoes of those people, can't you? Their lullabies drifted through humid jungles and crystalline domes. Their maps weren't printed, they were sung. Their language wasn't written, it was felt. They didn't carve monuments to last forever. They carved them to disappear gracefully. And that's why you've never heard of them. Because they didn't fail. They finished. And now, you're standing at the edge of their memory. You're the dreamer in the next cycle. And their stories are dripping down through the cracks in time, just enough for you to catch one drop. So hold it gently, there's more ahead. But remember, the kalpa doesn't care about your bedtime. When it ends, it ends. And somewhere in the dark, a new one already breathes. The mist thickens as you move forward, and now the ground feels slick, almost like scales. You blink. The world around you shimmers with a faint metallic hue. Something ancient watches you not with eyes but with memory. You've stepped into the domain of the Valucians. They're not in textbooks. You won't find them in dusty museums or on PBS documentaries. But in whispers, in dark corners of conspiracy forums and forgotten texts they live. According to some fringe researchers and very old stories, the Valucians were here long before humans, before mammals even. These weren't our ancestors. They were our landlords, described as reptilian in form, crystalline in technology, and utterly alien in consciousness. The Valucians were builders. Architects of Earth's first great civilizations, if you believe the stories. Their cities weren't above ground. They weren't even in caverns. They were embedded in the earth itself, woven into the rock like veins of silver. You hear that? That humming. That's the sound of machines still running beneath your feet, they say. Machines no one can find because they're not built with wires and steel. They're grown from frequency and crystal, more like music than metal. And here's the unsettling part. These stories come from all over the world. In Mesoamerica, the Maya told tales of serpent gods who came from beneath. In Australia, the rainbow serpent slithered across the land, creating rivers and laws. In India, the Nagas ruled entire underworld realms with glowing cities and jeweled technology. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe ancient people weren't hallucinating. Maybe they were remembering. Historians still debate whether these reptilian motifs are symbolic, representing wisdom, danger, fertility, or actual references to beings that really existed. But some researchers have pointed out that the earliest depictions of gods and creators across multiple cultures are surprisingly non-human, and often uncomfortably snake-like. Now don't get spooked. No one's saying lizard men run your HOA. But think for a moment, what if evolution had taken a different route? What if 250 million years ago, a cold-blooded species got a head start, developed intelligence, and just went underground when things got messy? Odd fact for the night. There's a species of lizard called the tuatara that hasn't changed in over 200 million years. It even has a third eye. Not in a spooky spiritual sense, in a literal light-sensing evolutionary weirdness kind of way. And scientists still don't really know why it exists. Now imagine a whole branch of life like that. Intelligent, silent subterranean. Masters of frequencies, not fire. Builders of crystal, not concrete. What if they watched the surface go through its endless kalpa civilizations, rising and falling, and just waited? In the late 19th and early 20th century, theosophists like Helena Blavatsky spoke of root races. One of them was a reptilian civilization predating Atlantis called the Valucians, or sometimes Draconians. Of course, modern historians brush this off as racist, mystical nonsense. And to be fair, most of it probably is. But here's the uncomfortable thing. While the names change, the serpent people myths don't go away. They just get recycled. From Sumer to South Africa, someone's always talking about beings who slithered through time before us. And if you look closely, modern pop culture hasn't forgotten either. From Doctor Who to the X-Files to every third science fiction conspiracy theory on YouTube, there's always a cold-blooded presence beneath the floorboards. So let's play with it. Let's say the Valucians were real, that they built cities that pulsed with light, sang with intention, and operated on harmonics we can't yet comprehend. And let's say they saw us coming. The mammals, the warm-blooded chaos machines, loud, violent, forgetful, and so they left. Not to another planet, not to another dimension, just deeper. Below the basalt, beneath the tectonics, where even water can't reach them. They built vaults, not to hide, but to outwait. They encoded memories, not in books, but in crystals. That humming you sometimes hear in the forest, the deep vibration in caves, the strange resonance when you're utterly alone. Some say those are Valucian recordings, warnings, or maybe lullabies. It's all very dreamy, sure. But here's where it gets interesting. In recent years, geologists and acoustic engineers have studied resonance zones deep within the Earth, places where frequency behaves strangely. tunnels that echo in ways they shouldn't, subterranean cavities that shouldn't exist based on surface data. And some of them line up with ancient legends. Historians still argue whether those alignments are meaningful, but the Valucian hypothesis suggests that advanced beings could have manipulated Earth's natural frequencies, shaping energy to form structures undetectable to modern tools. Think about that civilizations we can't find because they didn't build the way we do. Not visible, not measurable, not intended for us. There's even a theory, yes, a real fringe one, that Valucian memory is stored in global crystal lattices. That quartz found in nearly every continent is their hard drive, and maybe, just maybe, some of us can still pick up the signal. You've probably felt it before. A place that buzzes without sound. A feeling that something ancient is just below your feet, listening, waiting. Or maybe that's just your imagination, but maybe it's not. So, what happened to the Valucians? Were they wiped out in a great flood? Did they cause it? Or are they still there, scratching symbols into the walls of their crystal kingdoms, dreaming of a surface world that's finally quiet enough to return to? And if they do come back, what will they find? A civilization drowning in data, but starving for memory. Maybe that's the real fear. Not that they'll return, but that we've become too noisy to hear them when they do. You take another step. The scales beneath you flicker, then dissolve. Whatever watched you releases you. The mist thickens again. And now, something is slithering deeper. Not away from you, but toward you. Your foot brushes the ground again, only this time it's not stone or scale. It's smooth, damp, like marble kissed by ocean air. You blink and the light changes. Suddenly everything feels deeper. Not darker, but lower, as if the ceiling of the world has dropped, and you're walking in a place you weren't supposed to find. Welcome to Patala, the underground empire of the Nagas. You've probably heard of them in passing. Snake people, maybe Indian mythology. But that's just the surface. Patala isn't a metaphor, and the Nagas aren't just myth. If you listen closely to the old Sanskrit texts, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, you'll find something astonishing. The world isn't made of one realm. It's stacked. 7 realms above and 7 below. Earth is the median, the awkward middle child. And Patala, it's the 5th realm down. But don't let down fool you. These aren't hells. They're not prisons or punishment zones. They're kingdoms. And Patala, it's stunning, described in sacred texts as a realm more beautiful than heaven. Patala is said to be lit by gemstones, scented by blooming coral trees, and filled with cities whose walls pulse with light. It's not fire and brimstone, it's silk and frequency. You don't get punished in Patala. You get seduced. Here's the wild part. The Nagas who rule this place aren't evil. They're complex, intelligent, magical, emotionally layered. They are serpents, yes, but also divine beings with knowledge far beyond what humans can handle. Kings, queens, philosophers, mystics. Some scholars suggest they were the memory keepers of pre-flood knowledge, guardians of the old science. And maybe when the surface world turned chaotic, when the great floods came, the Nagas didn't die, they withdrew. Historians still debate whether the underground realms in Hindu cosmology were metaphysical or real. But the consistency across texts is unsettling. Different epics, different time periods, different authors, all speaking of glowing underground palaces filled with snake kings and buried secrets, and they weren't alone. In Buddhist and Jain cosmologies, The underworlds return again and again. Places of wisdom, rebirth, and forgotten technologies. You're not supposed to be scared of them, you're supposed to respect them. Now let's throw some real-world spice into this. Did you know that in parts of India and Nepal, there are entire temple complexes said to be built atop entrances to Patala, the Sheshnag temple in Jammu, the Padmanabhaswamy temple in Kerala, and deep within those temples are sealed chambers, some of which haven't been opened in centuries. In the case of Padmanabhaswamy, one particular vault remains locked to this day, said to be protected by curses, serpents, and ancient mechanisms. What's behind the door? No one knows. Odd fact. For the evening, there's a serpent king in Hindu lore named Vasuki. He's often depicted coiled around the neck of Shiva, like a sacred necklace. But in other stories, he's down in Patala, governing with fairness and terrifying serenity. Imagine a being older than humanity, smarter than quantum theory, and deeply bored with our chaos. And now imagine him waking up, because that's one theory that the Nagas are sleeping. Not dead, not vanished, just biding their time. Patala wasn't a place of escape, it was a time capsule. A reset bunker, a knowledge vault buried beneath eons of forgetfulness. And we poor mammals that we are keep drilling and blasting and mining, inching closer to doors we don't understand. There's a recurring pattern in Hindu stories. When humans get too arrogant, too noisy, too destructive, the Nagas retaliate. Not out of spite, but out of balance. They're like ecological enforcers, not interested in war, interested in course correction. And some believe the next correction is overdue. Here's a wrinkle for your bedtime brain. Across the world, indigenous peoples speak of serpent beings beneath the earth. In the Americas, the Hopi people speak of a snake clan. In Africa, Dogon cosmology includes amphibious serpent gods who came from Sirius. In China, the dragon benevolent and wise is said to live in deep waters and underground palaces. Even in Celtic myth, you get whispers of worms in hollow hills. All separate cultures, all speaking the same serpent language. Coincidence? Historians say yes, but let's suppose for just one night they're wrong. Let's say the Nagas are real, and that Patala isn't a myth, but a pressure-sealed, climate-controlled vault under the crust. A world where knowledge isn't written down, but sung into crystal. Where light doesn't shine, it breathes. Now picture this: a great flood, 10,000 years ago. Sea levels rise, cities crumble, humans scatter. But beneath it all, the Nagas remain untouched. Watching, remembering, and maybe, just maybe, intervening. Because there are stories, quiet ones, of people who vanish into caves and never return. Or who return changed, marked, knowing things they shouldn't, spouting words in dead languages, dreaming of serpents crowned in gold. And then there's the architecture. At Nan Madol, off the coast of Micronesia, massive basalt pillars form a city in the sea. No one knows who built it. No one knows how. But legend says it was constructed with the help of beings from beneath the waves. That's not a coincidence. That's a breadcrumb. So what does Patala teach us? That perhaps not all ancient civilizations were erased. Some just moved. Downward. Inward. Silent by design. You press your hand to the stone wall beside you and feel a pulse just once, like a heartbeat. Not yours. You're not alone down here. But whatever lives in Patala isn't afraid of you. It's remembering you and maybe deciding. Your path narrows, now growing warmer, lighter, strangely pleasant, like walking into a sunrise made of mist. There's something different about this next place. Not heavy like Patala, not buzzing like the Valucians. It's calm, serene, but too serene. Like a painting that's too perfect, too still. You've arrived at the edges of White Island. You won't find this one on a map, not unless the map sings when you open it. White Island, or Shvetadvipa, in some ancient texts, isn't just lost. It was never part of Earth, in the way we understand geography. It existed, and maybe still does, somewhere beyond the veil. A place that withdraws when it's seen, that deletes itself from memory the moment your foot touches its shores. Sounds absurd, right? A hidden utopia too flawless to survive contact. That's exactly the point. In ancient Hindu cosmology, Shvetadvipa was described as an island ruled by Vishnu himself. Not the warrior form, not the destroyer, but as a recluse, God meditating in solitude, far from the chaos of men and demons. The island was a realm of purity and stillness. White sands, white trees, white air. Everything soft, unbroken, luminous. But here's the twist, it was off limits. Even the gods weren't supposed to visit casually. Only sages who had transcended duality ego desire, only they could approach. To set foot on White Island was to accept you might not return. Not because you'd be punished, but because you'd simply forget to leave. Historians still debate whether White Island was metaphor or metaphysical refuge. Some suggest it was a reference to altered states of consciousness, maybe induced by ritual fasting or psychedelic vision. Others argue it was a real concept in Vedic cosmology, a realm that intersected with Earth in moments of cosmic alignment. And yet stories of places like this aren't exclusive to South Asia. In Celtic myth, there's Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, hidden across the Western Sea. In Polynesian lore, Hawaii is the ancestral homeland, a place of spirits and undying peace. Even in Christian Apocrypha, there's the land of Prester John, a utopia so remote and holy that it exists beyond sin itself. It's the same story over and over again. A perfect place, always just out of reach. Always waiting, but never welcoming. So what happened to White Island? Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the horror. See, most pre-flood civilizations vanish in cataclysm waves, war wrath of gods. But White Island, it didn't fall. It left, or more precisely, it folded. Back into the dream space that birthed it. Some say it retreated to preserve itself. That when the floodwaters came and the human world panicked, White Island simply closed its gates, not out of fear, but disappointment. Here's an odd little fact. In some esoteric schools, there's a belief that White Island was not a place you went to, but a layer of perception you tuned into. Like a frequency only some minds could hear. And when the great disasters struck the earth, when the Atlanteans fell, when Lemuria crumbled, the residents of White Island simply shifted up. A higher octave of being, a quieter wavelength. If that sounds like New Age gibberish, consider this. In quantum physics, there's real speculation about parallel dimensions. Not fantasy, but math. Brains, membranes, multi-worlds. If energy can exist in simultaneous states, who's to say entire civilizations couldn't ride those frequencies? Hide in plain sight. You might have brushed against White Island already. Ever stood in a forest and suddenly felt outside of time? Or found a moment in your life so surreal, so peaceful, that it didn't feel like yours? Maybe that was a flicker, a shadow, a thin place. And maybe the island blinked back. Ancient Buddhist legends describe pure lands, places created by bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who wanted to build realms free of suffering. They weren't heavens, They were practice zones. And the greatest of these Sukhavati is sometimes described in exactly the same terms as White Island, blindingly beautiful, unreachable by the impure, immune to decay. Some fringe historians suggest that these were not metaphors, but memory fragments. That in the distant past, advanced civilizations created sanctuary zones sealed off from entropy, sealed off from time itself. White Island wasn't lost, it was archived, cold storaged, waiting for someone who remembered the password. But here's the creepy part. What if people still stumble into it? There are urban legends, you know. People who go hiking and vanish. People who sleep in ancient groves and wake up different, speaking new languages, forgetting their names, describing cities with white trees and skies with no sun. They never call it White Island, but they never stop dreaming of it either. Now, let's stretch the imagination one more time. What if White Island wasn't built by pre-flood civilizations, but for them? What if it's a backup drive for humanity's golden age? A place where every poem, every song, every lost dialect is being stored, safely, silently waiting for us to stop being so loud. You reach out as the light pulses around you. The warmth is so inviting. You're not afraid. You feel like maybe you could step forward and never come back. You wouldn't be missed. You wouldn't even miss. But then just as your foot lifts, it fades. The trees vanish. The sand melts. The air loses its glow. You blink. You're back on cold stone. And all that's left is the echo of white. The warmth is gone. The brightness that clung to your skin in White Island has vanished, replaced by a subtle chill. Not cold, not biting, just sacred. Like the air in a room where someone once whispered a truth too powerful to repeat. You feel it in your lungs as you breathe in like a vow you didn't mean to take. You've arrived in Tushida heaven, but don't let the name fool you. This isn't fluffy clouds and harp-playing cherubs. This is something older, stranger, hauntingly still. Tushida isn't where you go after death. It's where you wait, or more precisely, where beings wait for you. Let's rewind a bit. In Mahayana Buddhism, Tushita is one of the higher heavenly realms, Devalokas, if you want to get technical. But unlike the others, which are mostly about enjoying the cosmic fruits of good karma, celestial Netflix, anyone Tushita has a very specific role. It's the holding place of future Buddhas. Yeah, you heard that right. Not past Buddhas. Future ones. Beings who've achieved enlightenment, but have chosen not to escape. Not to transcend. Not to dissolve into that comforting cosmic soup. No, they hang back. They stay. Just close enough to hear your prayers, but far enough that they don't interfere. Yet. Sounds noble, doesn't it? But also incredibly heavy. These aren't deities lounging in heaven. These are saviors in waiting. Imagine becoming the wisest, most peaceful, most complete version of yourself, and then having to put everything on pause because the world's not ready yet. Or maybe because you're not. That's Tushita. And if you ask some of the old esoteric texts, Tushita isn't just a realm for future Buddhas. It's also where the ancient pre-flood teachers retreated. Yes, civilizations didn't just collapse. They ascended, or maybe paused, or got archived in a realm like Tushita, a kind of spiritual cryo-freezer, where knowledge doesn't die, it just waits for the right alignment. Historians still debate whether Tushita is meant as a literal dimension or a metaphor for inner awareness. But even the most skeptical scholars admit something strange nearly every advanced culture has a version of this waiting room for gods or teachers. In Norse mythology, Odin wanders, but always returns to Asgard, resting between cycles of chaos. In Aztec lore, Quetzalcoatl sails east, promising to return. In Christianity, Christ doesn't just rise, he promises a second coming. And in Tibetan Buddhism, Maitreya, the next Buddha sits right now in Tushida, smiling gently, surrounded by light, waiting for the moment he must descend. You want something unsettling. Some spiritual traditions teach that when the flood comes, not if, but when the Buddhas of Tushida will return. But not in robes, not in chants. They'll come as light as thunder, as voices in the minds of those who can hear. And when they do, they won't be gentle. They'll be merciful. There's a difference, odd fact. In certain Tibetan art, Tushita is drawn not as a sky realm, but as a floating palace surrounded by storm clouds with thousands of eyes carved into its walls. Eyes that don't blink, eyes that see across dimensions. Why would a paradise need eyes like that? Maybe because it's watching more than just time. Maybe it's watching us. And here's a darker question. What if Tushida wasn't just a realm of waiting, but of quarantine? Think about it. You're a being of vast wisdom. You've lived countless lives. You've taught. You've died. You've healed. And now you've graduated. But instead of peace, you're told, wait, stay nearby. Humanity's going to need you again. Soon. That's not retirement. That's a cosmic task list. And maybe the pre-flood civilizations knew this. Maybe the great teachers of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of Kumari Kandam, they didn't die in flames and floods. They transcended, but not to abandon us. They went to Tushita to wait. Some fringe Buddhist texts even suggest that the flood itself was part of the plan, that the reset was necessary not to destroy evil, but to give humanity another chance to grow. And once we grew enough, the doors of Tushida would open again. That's not judgment. That's hope, but it's also deeply unnerving, because it means someone somewhere is keeping score. Here's something else that might keep you awake. Some mystics believe that flashes of déjà vu, sudden moments of insight, or inexplicable dreams are tiny breaches in the Tushida veil. That when you feel like you're meant to do something, or when you hear a voice that isn't yours guiding you in a moment of crisis, it's them, and they're checking in. You step deeper now, and everything around you feels light but weighty, as if truth has gravity. You feel watched but not judged. You feel expected. Maybe this is the real legacy of the pre-flood world. Not monuments or ruins, not lost technology or golden idols, but patience. The decision by the greatest minds of a forgotten era not to escape, but to wait for you. And now the mist around you dims slightly. A breeze stirs not from the front, but from behind, like something's coming. Slowly, purposefully. The teachers of Tushida aren't sleeping. They're preparing. And maybe, so should you. You feel it before you hear it. A low rumble deep in your bones, like a generator buried under centuries of silence. The light from Tushida fades into shadow, and your steps begin to echo, not off stone, but off something older. Something carved before sound knew what to do with itself. This is no city meant for humans. You've reached the territory of the elder race. Now, to be clear, elder race doesn't refer to an age group. These weren't your neighborhood council of ancient wise folks sipping tea and handing out riddles. No, this is something bigger. something colder. These beings, if you can even call them that, predate us. Not just Homo sapiens, not just mammals, life as we know it. Some call them the precursors, the architects, the watchers, or, in more paranoid corners of the internet, the ones who left. But the term elder race sticks because it feels reverent, like something you'd whisper in a museum, where the walls are made of time itself. According to ancient lore, including sources as disparate as Sumerian texts, Lovecraftian horror, and even obscure Vedic interpretations, these were non-human intelligences that helped design the framework of reality, or at least this planet. Cities built not on ground, but on energy grids. Structures that didn't just resist time, they ignored it. Historians still debate whether these stories are pure myth or metaphors for natural forces, but fringe theorists have a more unsettling idea that these weren't gods or aliens or metaphors, but actual entities who engineered ecosystems, set magnetic fields, maybe even nudged evolution itself. You know that uncanny feeling you get at certain ancient sites, like someone built it for a species with longer limbs, wider eyes, a different relationship to gravity. Welcome to the elder race, and they didn't leave behind ruins in the way we expect. There are no statues of them, no frescoes, because the elder race didn't care about being remembered. They didn't decorate. They designed with precision, not pride. Take, for example, the layout of megalithic sites around the globe. From Giza to Baalbek, from Pumapunku to the now submerged ruins off Yonaguni, we see the same themes, stone blocks so precisely cut, they might as well be buttered glass. Alignments with celestial bodies that would require centuries of data, unless you just knew how the sky worked already. Structures built on frequencies, not foundations. And then there's the truly unsettling part. Some of these places aren't just aligned with the stars of today. They're aligned with the positions of stars from tens of thousands of years ago. Stars that haven't been overhead since before recorded history. Odd fact. There are acoustic anomalies in many of these ancient sites. Clap your hands in certain chambers, and you'll hear harmonics not found in nature tones that resonate in your teeth more than your ears. And some researchers believe these chambers weren't for worship, but for communication. Not with the gods, but with the builders. The elder race may not have lived among us, but they left behind nodes, energetic landmarks, places where their signal could still be received. And maybe, just maybe, where their return could be summoned. Now here's where things get speculative, but deliciously eerie. Some myths claim the elder race didn't die. They went into stasis, deep within Antarctica, or buried under the Himalayas, or sealed in chambers beneath the ocean floor. Not because they were defeated, but because their work was done. They seeded civilizations, set up the variables, and then stepped back, like gardeners or programmers. And if you believe the mythos especially, the darker threads, the elder race isn't indifferent. They're monitoring, not out of malice, but curiosity, like a scientist watching petri dishes evolve. And we're the dish, Lovecraft. The reluctant prophet of cosmic horror painted a terrifying picture of these beings not as monsters, but as forces so vast, so ancient that our minds couldn't comprehend them. Cities built of non-Euclidean geometry. Creatures who communicated not with speech but pressure, and most importantly, beings who weren't evil, just indifferent. Think about that. The idea that your entire species could be observed, not judged, not punished, just cataloged. Not worth a conversation. Just there. a fleeting pattern in the soil. And yet, sometimes they whisper. There are stories, quiet ones of explorers who went too deep, scientists who broke atoms too carelessly, shamans who sang the wrong song. And what they encountered wasn't madness. It was design, a sense that everything, every cell, every mineral, every thought had already been accounted for. One researcher whose work got buried under piles of academic ridicule claimed to have recorded ultra-low frequency vibrations in certain caves, vibrations that pulsed in fractal patterns. Not random, not seismic, but coded. She called them the mother tones. Her recordings were confiscated. Her research was labeled pseudoscience. She disappeared from the academic map. Sound familiar? So what if the elder race really did leave behind instructions, not in language, but in resonance? A song hummed through bedrock, waiting, decoding. A key that only becomes audible when the right soul walks into the right chamber with the right intention. And maybe that person is alive right now. Maybe they're listening. Maybe they're you. You pause. The path before you isn't stone anymore. It's something else. Dark, smooth, reflective, but not like a mirror. It reflects not your face, but something behind your eyes. You don't recognize it, but the path does. Whatever lives here knows you're here. Not in a threatening way. Not yet. Just as a fact. Like a note left on a counter we noticed. So you keep walking. And behind you, the air rearranges itself perfectly. Like a door that was never open, but always watching. There's a pressure building now. Not painful, but unmistakable. Like the air just got a little thicker. A little smarter. You feel it in your skin, in your thoughts. Something is watching, and this time, it doesn't hide. It stares. You've entered the realm of the serpent people. They go by many names. The Nagas, the Lizard Kings, the Draconians. In every corner of mythology, there is a whisper of them. Cold-blooded, intelligent, regal. And beneath all the symbolism, one recurring theme slithers back again and again. They were here first. In many ancient traditions, the serpent is not evil, it's sacred. In Hinduism, Nagas are divine. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent is a civilizer, a bringer of law and knowledge. In Egypt, Wadjet the cobra goddess guarded pharaohs. In Greece, Python was slain not for being wicked, but for being old. Too powerful. Historians still debate whether the serpent archetype represents primal instincts, wisdom, or fertility. But if you dig deeper beneath the metaphor, there's another interpretation, that the serpent people were real, that they ruled the earth before humans, and that we didn't evolve, we replaced them. Imagine it. A dominant species, perhaps reptilian or amphibian in nature, long-lived, telepathic, masters of genetic engineering, cold-blooded, yes, but not unfeeling, structured, precise. They didn't build empires for conquest. They built them for balance, order. Then came us, loud, erratic, aggressively warm-blooded, and aggressively forgetful. We didn't inherit the earth. We overthrew it. Some theorists believe the Great Flood myths are not just warnings, they're cover stories. That the deluge wasn't punishment from the gods, but the desperate last gasp of a dying civilization, the serpent people trying to stop something they couldn't control. And failing. The Hopi tell of the Snake Clan ancient ancestors who lived in harmony with nature, but were driven underground. Australian Aboriginal lore speaks of the rainbow serpent who created rivers and mountains but now slumbers below. The Zulu say their gods, the Chitauri, came from beneath, not above. And then there's the Nag Hammadi texts, early Christian writings that describe archons, reptilian rulers of the material world, who corrupted human perception and control reality through deception. Odd coincidence, perhaps. Odd fact, there's a species of lizard that can literally change its sex based on temperature. No hormones, no surgery, just environmental stimulus. Nature built these creatures with switches. Now imagine an intelligent species capable of doing the same changing physiology voice form on command. Now imagine they've been watching us. Many believe the serpent people didn't die out, they went underground. Literally. Into deep caverns, into myths, into shadow. Some think they still influence global events. Others say that's just paranoia layered over coincidence. But what if both are true? What if they never left, but chose instead to become invisible, not in a sci-fi way, in a cultural way, through stories, statues, forgotten languages? Imagine a civilization so advanced it knew how to survive extinction, not by fighting back, but by hiding in symbolism. Let humans have the surface. Let them build skyscrapers and forget the stars. Let them laugh at snake gods. And then, wait, you feel it, don't you? The watching. There's something serpentine about how knowledge coils tight-layered, ready to strike. The serpent people were said to be masters of hypnosis frequency and memory suppression. In some versions of the myth, they don't just rule with power, they rule with forgetting. You didn't kill them. You just forgot they were real. But sometimes, memory slips. Sometimes, it curls back in your dreams. Serpent imagery in sacred temples. Strange vertical pupils in cave paintings. Unexplained hissing in the depths of the Amazon jungle. There's a cave in Mexico, Cueva de los Tallos, where explorers have reported strange lights, smooth walls, and glyphs that don't match any known culture. One explorer even claimed to have seen enormous statues of serpent kings with arms like men but heads like dragons. He died in a car crash 3 weeks after the interview. Of course, historians still dismiss most of this. They say serpents are universal because snakes are everywhere, that our brains evolved to fear them, so they slither into our myths naturally. But what if that's exactly what the serpent people wanted, to be everywhere, in memory, in language, in the very structure of our myths? You hear the hissing again now. It's faint, maybe just wind, but it carries rhythm. Like a lullaby in a language too ancient to pronounce. The serpent people aren't monsters. They're not demons. They're the memory of structure, the whisper that order once ruled the earth, before fire, before metal, before man. Some say they're still down there, perfecting the next genome, watching cities rise and fall, waiting until our chaos burns itself out. And when it does, they'll return, not with war, not with sound, but with clarity. So you keep walking. The ground underfoot feels coiled, layered, endless. And behind you, nothing slithers. Because it doesn't have to. It's already inside. The path now bends not sharply, but like a spiral, like a helix. The air here doesn't just feel old, it feels wrong. As if time hiccuped and forgot how to be linear. Things shimmer at the corners of your vision shapes that vanish before you can define them. You're stepping into a question that history refuses to answer. You've arrived at the world of the pre-Adamic races. Most people assume history starts with us, with Homo sapiens. Maybe with Adam and Eve, if you like your stories with fig leaves. Maybe with early stone tools, if you're more National Geographic. Either way, we like to think of ourselves as the beginning. But what if we're not? What if we're the reboot? In ancient Abrahamic traditions, especially older Jewish mysticism, there's a persistent whisper that Adam was not the first human, not even close. There were beings before him. Entire races wiped clean before Eden ever got landscaped. They're called the Pre-adamites. According to some texts, these early beings were intelligent, divine, but flawed. And when they fell out of alignment with their purpose or with the Creator, they weren't just banished. They were deleted. Not punished with a flood or fire, but erased with something far scarier, forgetting. But traces remain. Odd fossil finds, out-of-place artifacts, tools embedded in 300-million-year-old rock, footprints where no feet should have walked, stories etched into stone tablets from Sumer Babylon, even older. Not about man, but about proto-men, hybrid beings, light-skinned giants, tall watchers with no faces. You've heard the term Nephilim, right? In the book of Genesis, it's a casual aside. There were giants in those days, just tossed in there like the biblical version of anyway moving on. But these Nephilim weren't just tall dudes. They were the offspring of gods and mortals, the result of forbidden unions. And their very existence was said to be an abomination. So what did the flood really wash away? Sin or competition? Historians still debate whether pre-Adamic stories are ancient metaphors or religious cover-ups for a lost chapter of humanity. Some point to pre-Sumerian cultures, like the Ubaid, who carved lizard-headed humanoids in clay long before the pharaohs built anything. Others highlight the Zohar and the Book of Enoch texts that describe fallen angels mating with early human women, creating a race too powerful, too chaotic, too non-compliant to be allowed. So they were wiped out, reset, but not completely. Because here's where it gets even stranger. Multiple cultures describe memory fragments, flashes, dreams, voices from the deep past. People who remember lifetimes they couldn't have lived. Languages that surface in trance states. Children who speak of before the first people. In some esoteric schools, these are called Akashic echoes, residual knowledge bleeding through the firewall of time. And the firewall is thin. You ever walk into a place and feel like it remembers you? Or meet someone and know you've known them before in a world where the sky was orange and there were no stars? Maybe that's the pre-Adamic whisper. Odd fact. In the 19th century, some archaeologists claim to have found hammerheads, nails, and even walls inside ancient coal seams, objects supposedly millions of years old. Of course, mainstream science dismissed them as misinterpretations or hoaxes, but they keep popping up. Every few decades, someone finds a problem object. A carved stone older than any known culture. A tool made of alloys we didn't invent yet. A set of footprints next to dinosaur tracks, and they always get filed away under anomalies, or worse, forgotten. Why? Because they don't fit the story we tell ourselves. The story that starts with us, but maybe we're not the start. Maybe we're the restart. And the pre-Adamic races, they were the original build. More advanced in some ways, more connected to the earth, maybe even telepathic, maybe even post-biological. But they made a mistake. Maybe they tried to rewrite the rules. Maybe they got bored. Maybe they just forgot how to care. So, they were wiped clean. The earth rebooted. The system restarted. But deep in the code, like ghost files on a hard drive, some of their data remained. You feel it now, don't you? That sensation behind your eyes. Like someone left a message there a very long time ago, and you've only just now learned how to read it. There's a theory quietly discussed in some corners of cognitive science that the brain carries non-genetic memory, impressions not from your past, but from a shared ancestral experience. And what if some of those impressions didn't come from humans at all? What if you're running on legacy software? You ever feel like there's a part of you that just doesn't belong to this world? That craves silence, or pattern, or light in a way that defies explanation? Maybe you're not defective. Maybe you're remembering something older, something not quite human. There are even whispers, dangerous ones, that the pre-Adamic races didn't all vanish, that a few survived the reset, that they walk among us still, not as shapeshifters or monsters, but as genetic shadows, a little too intuitive, a little too cold, a little too timeless. And maybe that's the real secret of the pre-Adamites. They didn't fail. They were archived. You take another step. The spiral beneath you shivers just a little, as if it recognizes your blood, as if something ancient just blinked open one eye in the back of your DNA. You don't see anything, but something just saw you, and it remembers. The spiral ends without warning. The ground flattens. The mist hangs lower, now more like breath than air. The silence isn't peaceful. It's expectant. You feel like you've just walked into a room full of people who stopped talking the moment you arrived, because now you're standing where it all began. Welcome to Atlant. Yes, Atlantis, you were expecting that. But this is older, deeper. The thing before Atlantis, a word not found in Plato's writings or modern myth. Atlant the root, the original idea, before it became a metaphor, a myth, a hotel chain. This wasn't a city. This wasn't even a continent. Atlant was a template in some ancient lore fringe to scholars, but sacred to others. Atlant wasn't destroyed. It was copied, iterated, like a divine blueprint, used again and again to build civilizations. Egypt, Sumer, Mesoamerica, Angkor, all sharing traits not because they evolved independently, but because they were replicas, shadows of the original code. You know the story of Atlantis as Plato told it, an advanced civilization that got too proud, too powerful, and was swallowed by the sea. But in the older tales, the ones rarely told, Atlant didn't fall because of hubris. It fell because it was too successful, too advanced, too balanced, too dangerous. It wasn't just cities and sewers and temples. It was thought structures, memory systems, even weather control. The kind of civilization that didn't just build pyramids, it built meaning. And past that meaning, along with symbols, harmonics, architecture that echoed more than sound. Historians still debate whether Atlantis was based on a real place, maybe Minoan Crete, maybe Doggerland, maybe somewhere in the Caribbean. But there are older references in Egyptian, Phoenician, and Berber myth of a shining origin place in the West. Not a ruin, a source. Atlant wasn't wiped out in a day and night of misfortune. It withdrew. Because the world wasn't ready for it. Odd fact for tonight. Some linguists believe the syllable Atl appears in dozens of place names linked to water or sky, from Aztlan in Aztec myth to Atla in Norse. Even in Basque, the word for source or spring sounds eerily familiar. It's as if the syllables themselves are encoded with ancestral memory. As if we keep naming places after the thing we forgot. Atlant, according to some esoteric traditions, existed in a time before linear time. A cyclical era. An era where beings didn't just use technology, they sang with it. Where buildings responded to thought, and where time moved like breath, in and out, in and out. And when the rhythm was broken, when the harmony fractured, Atlant didn't crumble. It was shut down. Intentionally, like a machine powering off before it could be hijacked. And here's the part that'll rattle your teeth. Some believe that remnants of Atlant still exist, not as ruins, but as behaviors. Patterns embedded in human culture that surface again and again. The obsession with sacred geometry, the global phenomenon of pyramidal structures, the use of sound in religious ritual, all of it, residual software. The builders of Atlant may be gone, but their operating system is still running. Every time someone gets a strange compulsion to align stones with a solstice or hum in a dark cave, that's the code reactivating. A glitch in the forgetting. You feel it, don't you? That low frequency humming just beneath your skin. That's not your imagination. That's recognition. Some say the Atlanteans encoded warnings that when the rhythm of human civilization once again hit a certain dissonant peak, when greed, war, noise, and distraction drowned out the original tone, they'd be forced to reboot the system. Not with water this time, but with resonance. Maybe that's what the ringing in your ears really is. Not tinnitus, not stress, but the wake-up tone. There are places in the world where people have built without understanding why. Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, Gantija. Not because the structures made sense, but because the land remembered. And the land whispered instructions. What if you're standing on top of Atlant right now? Not underwater, not lost, just unread. A book, written in frequency and form. And we're only now learning to translate the title page. There's a structure off the coast of Cuba, anomalies picked up by sonar that resemble massive stone formations. Divers have reported city-like grids, but no official excavation has ever confirmed anything. There are laws of geology, and then there are laws of forgetting. Atlant was not lost because it failed. Atlant was lost because we failed it. We turned its legacy into bedtime stories, cartoon mermaids, glossy documentaries, and beneath all of that, something ancient kept pulsing, waiting for us to get quiet enough to hear it. Now you're here, and the air feels denser, not heavier, just more certain. Like you finally arrived at the real start of the story. You reach down. The ground isn't stone. It's glass, black, reflective, a memory interface. You don't see your face. You see the sky. The stars align just like they were before the forgetting, and behind you, just barely, you hear it. The first note, the chord of Atlant. The note fades, but the vibration lingers. You feel it in your chest, in your teeth. It's not music exactly, more like intention. Like the world around you is trying to say something, but can't form the words. The silence isn't empty now. It's full, pressurized. Like the atmosphere of a planet you don't remember visiting. That's when you feel the tide. You haven't seen water. Not yet. But it's coming. You can taste its salt, ancient and bitter. And with it comes the presence. You don't know if it's a being or a force. You only know its name. Yam? Not the vegetable, obviously. Yam is older than agriculture. Older than myth. In ancient Near Eastern cosmology, especially in Ugaritic texts, Yam was the god of the sea. But not the calm vacation brochure sea. No. Yam is the chaotic ocean, the original wet engine of destruction. He doesn't roar. He claims. In the tablets, from Ras Shamrayam, is locked in eternal conflict with Baal, the god of order and fertility. Yam wants to drown the world in primordial waters, not out of anger, but out of design. He is entropy in liquid form. And here's where it gets interesting. Yam isn't unique. Cultures across the world tell of sea gods not as nurturing motherly types, but as cosmic forces of reset. In Mesopotamia, it's Tiamat. In the Bible, the deep waters over which God hovers. In Egypt, Nun. In India, the churning ocean of milk. In the Pacific, the endless flood myths of wave gods with long, remembering arms. Historians still debate whether these are just personifications of natural disasters, storms, tsunamis, floods. But what if they're more? What if the sea itself is alive, not sentient in the way we understand it, but aware? Aware of imbalance, aware of memory, aware of you. Odd fact, water holds memory. It's not just poetic, it's experimental. Some fringe researchers suggest that water molecules respond to emotional input, to language, to vibration, that it can remember structures, respond to pattern, even retain trauma. Now think about the ocean. The biggest water, the deepest, the most unmapped. 95% of it remains unexplored. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about what lies in the Marianas Trench. And what if, that wasn't because it's hard? What if it's because it's forbidden? There are stories, some ancient, some modern, of deep-sea divers who descend too far and see impossible things. Cities without names. Lights that pulse in geometries no biology should make. Machines. Eyes. Not fish eyes. Memory eyes. You ever wonder why every flood myth around the world sounds the same? Not similar, the same. People build towers, grow proud, forget the balance. Then the sea rises, takes everything, leaves nothing, and then the story begins again. Yam doesn't come to punish. Yam comes to reset. Atlant fell. Lemuria drowned. Kumari Kandam was swallowed. The mound builders vanished. The serpent temples crumbled. And Yam was always there, not as a villain. As a program, imagine a planet designed with a built-in safeguard. A soft reset button. When things get too loud, too complex, too far from harmony flush. Yam rolls in. The tides rise. The balance is restored. Some flood stories are suspiciously precise. The Black Sea deluge theory suggests a sudden breach of salt water into freshwater lakes that drowned settlements in hours. Geologists have uncovered ancient shorelines under hundreds of feet of ocean in places like Bimini, the English Channel, and India's Gulf of Combat. And here's the eerie part. Many of those places have no recorded civilizations, but they do have legends of cities beneath the sea, of bells that can still be heard ringing from below, of temples that glow when the tide is right, of people who escaped but left everything else behind. You feel the current now, not against your skin, but inside it, a pulsing rhythm in your blood. It's not fear, it's recognition, because maybe Yam isn't something outside of you, maybe it's in you. The part of your biology that remembers drowning, that flinches at the sound of rushing water, that instinctively scans the horizon when the air gets too still. Some theorists believe Yam represents a collective memory. That deep in our DNA, there's a backup file labeled how the last civilization ended. And maybe, just maybe, when enough of us remember it, we can prevent it from happening again. But maybe not, because Yam is patient. Yam doesn't age. Yam doesn't rage. Yam waits. Waits for the right combination of arrogance and amnesia. Waits for the moment we build one tower too many. And then it arrives, not with lightning, not with sound, just water, endless, indifferent, inevitable. And in that water, the lost things are held. Temples, songs, names, languages, dreams, but not destroyed, just filed away in case we ever deserve to see them again. You hear it now, a single wave miles away. It hasn't reached you yet, but it's coming, not to drown, to erase, because sometimes starting over is mercy, and Yam always brings the tide in time. You step back just a little as the sound of that unseen wave fades, not receding, just pausing, as though Yam is letting you walk a little farther before the tide claims you. The ground beneath your feet is dry now, dusty, but it doesn't feel dead. It feels like memory trying to take root again. You're walking into the third world, not in the geopolitical sense. This isn't about developing nations or borders. This is about worlds, literal worlds, stacked like layers of reality. And according to the Hopi people, we're currently living in the fourth. Let that sink in. The Hopi, one of the oldest indigenous cultures in North America, tell of 3 previous worlds, each destroyed after people forgot how to live in balance. The first world was destroyed by fire, the second by ice, the third by water, of course, and now we're here, the fourth world. But tonight, you're drifting backward, back into the third, into the world before ours. A time that echoes just behind your dreams, a place where people spoke with spirit, where animals weren't just symbols, they were siblings. A world that was broken not by monsters, but by forgetfulness. According to Hopi oral tradition, the third world was vast and beautiful. Its people were gifted. They built great cities and knew the secrets of the stars. They could communicate through vibration. They honored the natural world, but slowly that balance frayed. They stopped listening, and the earth, as it always does, responded, but not with a snap, with a shift. As the third world fell apart, the ant people came. Yes, really ant people. The Hopi say that when the sky cracked and the oceans boiled, these beings led the survivors underground into hollow chambers where they waited out the destruction. And when it was safe to return, they climbed back through a reed back into the light. Sounds strange, sure, until you realize how many other cultures tell the same story. Underground sanctuaries. Beings that aren't quite human helping chosen survivors. And always, the return to the surface through something vertical. A tree, a ladder, a tunnel, a reed. Historians still debate whether the Hopi migration stories are symbolic or literal, but their precision is haunting. They describe directional migrations from the south, the west, the north, spirals of movement, sacred mesas, and above all, a memory of having done this before. The story of the third world isn't just a myth of destruction. It's a myth of reset, of survival, through cooperation, not conquest. Odd fact, Hopi Kivas ceremonial underground chambers often have a small hole in the floor called the sipapu. It represents the portal from the third world to the fourth. A hole not just in the ground, but in reality. You ever feel like you're standing in the right place at the wrong time? Like the world around you is an echo, and you're remembering something that hasn't happened yet. That's third world memory. It's not linear, it's spiral. In fact, many indigenous teachings view time that way, not as a line, but a spiral. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes tighter and tighter with each turn. And right now, we're starting to hear the same chorus again. Water rising, fires burning, winds howling louder than we're used to. And once more, we've stopped listening. In Hopi prophecy, there's a moment called the Day of Purification, a time when the earth will shake off its burdens again, just like it did at the end of the Third World. A time when those who remember the old ways will lead the rest through the chaos, not into bunkers or arks, but into right relationship with the land, with spirit, with each other. But it requires something terrifying. Letting go of the world we built. The story of the Third World isn't just a bedtime tale. It's a warning, wrapped in a lullaby, that when we ignore balance, when we try to conquer rather than connect, when we confuse complexity for wisdom, the world does what it's always done. It makes room for something new, and sometimes that new thing has to come after us. There are petroglyphs in Arizona circles, inside circles, spirals that end in abrupt stops. You've probably seen them and thought nothing. But to the Hopi, those aren't just decorations. They're maps of other worlds and how we got from them to here. You reach the end of the path now, and there's a small hole in the earth barely noticeable, not big enough to crawl into. But something about it calls you, not in words, in rhythm, a thump, a beat, like a heartbeat that never stopped. Maybe the Third World didn't end. Maybe we're standing on top of it, and maybe it's still whispering, telling us what we've forgotten, telling us what's coming next, telling us to listen. The wind shifts again. This time it smells like dust and wet stone, like something buried for 10,000 years, just stirred in its sleep. You move forward, and the terrain changes flatter, wider. There's a strange silence here, not emptiness, but something muffled, like someone pressed a giant pillow over history and held it there. You've reached the Fertile Crescent, but not the one you learned about in school. This is the version before the names, before Mesopotamia, before Sumer, before cities were etched into stone tablets and kings invented writing to keep track of grain. This is about the civilizations that came before all that, and were forgotten before they even had time to be remembered. You've heard it called the cradle of civilization. The arc from the Tigris-Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq up through Syria and southeastern Turkey and over toward the Nile. The first farms, the first cities, the first temples. The place where humans stopped wandering and started building. But here's the problem with cradles they swing. And this one rocked hard, so hard that entire chapters of human history were flung out and lost in the motion. Because long before Sumer there were cities. Long before the Akkadians people were farming, living in complex communities, building structures so advanced we still don't know how they did it. Places like Çatalhöyük in what is now Turkey. A city over 9,000 years old, with no streets, just rooftops. Homes so carefully designed, you had to climb down into them through a hole in the ceiling. They painted their walls with leopards and goddesses. They buried their dead under their floors, like a kind of spiritual insulation. And no one can tell you what language they spoke, what they believed, who they were, because they were forgotten, or maybe erased. Historians still debate the origins of urban life. The textbook story says everything started around 3100 BCE with the rise of Sumer. But then you look at Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. Archaeologists have found defensive walls there dating back to 8000 BCE. And those walls weren't primitive. They were engineered. By who? We don't know. Odd fact, the lowest levels of Jericho are buried under massive layers of silt and flood deposit. Water didn't just damage the city, it tried to bury it. And it almost succeeded. except that the stones remained, and the stones are telling on us. There are signs of forgotten flood events all across the Fertile Crescent. Sediment layers that don't belong. Cities with layers of ash and water damage that don't match the timeline. Mass graves with no clear cause of death. And then nothing. A gap in the record. A sudden silence. And after that silence, new cities built on top of the old. Almost like we started over. Almost like we didn't know what had come before. In the city of Eridu, one of the very first in Sumerian mythology, the ancient priests believed it was the first city ever built. Not just the first in the world, the first in the cosmos. Founded by the gods themselves. They even wrote about how it was destroyed and rebuilt 5 times before the version archaeologists have uncovered. And we're just supposed to ignore that. 5 resets, 5 floods, 5 forgettings. Sound familiar? What if those priests weren't being poetic? What if they were archivists? Some say the earliest Fertile Crescent civilizations weren't the first humans. They were the first survivors, the first to try again after everything else was washed away. The way we find their cities buried deep under layers of mud, rock, and strange silence seems less like decay and more like deliberate hiding, like they knew another wave would come, and they didn't want to be found yet. There's an archaeological site in Turkey called Gobekli Tepe. You'll hear more about it later, but here's something unsettling. It's older than farming, older than pottery, older than the wheel, and someone buried it on purpose. They didn't abandon it. They didn't leave it to crumble. They tucked it in, covered it in soil like a sacred thing, like a time capsule or a warning. The more we dig, the more this region tells us the same story. You are not the first. You are not the peak. You are just the most recent draft. And the drafts before you, they were impressive, but they weren't allowed to last because something, maybe maybe time, maybe us, keeps hitting reset. And the Fertile Crescent, it's not a cradle, it's a scar, a place where memory tries to grow back. Over and over again, only to be scraped clean, like a garden burned in fire, and re-sown with amnesia. You walk a little farther now through what feels like abandoned foundations, ghost walls, echoes of homes. The wind picks up sand and whispers it through ancient bricks, and for a moment you hear voices not speaking to you, but through you. A woman calling her children in a language that was never written. A priest humming a chant into a temple now swallowed by the dust. A builder carving his name into a stone, not knowing that stone would one day sit in a museum under a label that says unknown civilization. But they weren't unknown. They were forgotten on purpose. And maybe it's time we remembered. There's a shift in the air now. More humid, more golden. You smell something faint, like ash mixed with pollen. And for a moment, you feel like you're walking through sunlight caught in a bottle. The ruins behind you grow dim. And before you, the jungle awakens. But there's no roar, no chaos, only silence curated. You've reached the city of the sun, not the Incan one. Not the poetic name for some lost paradise, but something deeper. A city spoken of in whispers across South American myth. A place called El Dorado. Yes, that El Dorado, but forget the gold. That part came later, twisted by conquistadors and fevered treasure maps. The original city of the sun wasn't made for wealth. It was made for memory. And then it vanished. Let's rewind. The myth of El Dorado has traveled like a fever. First, it was a man, the gilded one covered in gold dust. Then it was a lake. Then a kingdom. Then a city, radiant impossible, built on top of mountains and hidden in clouds. Some claimed its streets were lined in light, that its walls shone with polished stone, not from vanity, but to reflect the sky. But in some older tellings, especially among the Muisca and the Inca, the city of the sun wasn't just physically beautiful. It was sacred, timed to solstices, structured according to stellar alignments, more observatory than city, more cathedral than castle. And here's the strange part. No one claims to have destroyed it. No war, no fire, no flood. It just withdrew, as if it realized the world had stopped listening, as if the city itself packed up its memories and vanished. Historians still argue whether El Dorado was ever real or simply a projection of colonial greed. But there's growing evidence of vast organized settlements across the Amazon basin. We're not talking huts. We're talking urban sprawl. Grids roads, engineered soil irrigation systems, all long before the Spanish arrived. The jungle didn't overtake these cities. They grew the jungle. You ever heard of terra preta? It's a kind of dark, ultra-fertile soil found deep in the Amazon. It's not natural. It was made enhanced by humans using charcoal pottery shards and bone. And it doesn't decompose like regular earth. It thrives. Who made it? The people of the City of the Sun, some say. A civilization so advanced, it farmed memory into the land. Odd fact, researchers have uncovered geoglyphs, massive geometric shapes carved into the Amazon's forest floor. Circles, squares, perfect lines, only visible from the air. Not made for walking or farming, made for looking up, as if the city was communicating with the stars, or maybe with something watching from them. There's a theory, not mainstream, not accepted, but persistent, that the City of the Sun wasn't just a city. It was a recorder, a machine made of stone and ritual, designed to preserve thought, not in language, in light. That's why everything was polished. That's why everything faced the sky. And maybe, just maybe, when the great upheavals came, when the waves of conquest, disease, and destruction began, the city didn't fight. It faded. Not because it was weak, because it was smart enough to know when to leave. And what if it didn't vanish completely? What if parts of it still breathe beneath the trees? There are uncontacted tribes in the Amazon who speak of sky cities, places you can only reach when the stars align. Not spaceships, not myths, just coordinates in time. And there are ruins still being found. In 2022, LiDAR technology revealed more than 60,000 previously unknown structures in the Guatemalan jungle. Roads, canals, homes, pyramids, an entire civilization hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by nature or camouflaged by design. Maybe the City of the Sun encoded its own disappearance. Maybe its architects understood that the most powerful preservation strategy is not to be seen. You step into a clearing now, not a real one, a mental one. The mist around you becomes golden. You feel its sunlight that shouldn't exist in this place. And the outline of a city shimmers, not ruins but whole. Walls that hum, towers that don't cast shadows, a river of light instead of water. You blink and it's gone, but not forgotten, because that's the trick of the City of the Sun. It doesn't want to be found. It wants to be remembered. It wants you to ask questions, to look up, to trace the movement of the sky with your hands, to plant thoughts like seeds in soil that refuses to die. It wants you to notice the rhythm in sunlight, the pattern in shadow, the language in light, and then to carry it with you so that one day, when the earth is quiet again and the noise of conquest has stilled, and the greed has turned to dust, the city can return, not as stone, but as knowing, because the city of the sun was never about gold. It was about what gold reflects. And if you can see that, you're already standing inside it. You leave the light behind, not because you want to, but because it fades on its own, as if the city of the sun knows you've learned enough for now. The jungle tightens around you, the trees standing taller, older, closer together. They don't whisper. They watch, and something under the forest floor begins to stir. Not footsteps, not water. Movement without shape. You've reached the realm of the earthborne. They weren't born the way you or I were. No wombs, no mothers, no bloodlines. They were emitted from the earth itself, pulled up like sap, like muscle, like rage given form. The earthborne appear in many ancient traditions, often described as giant stone-skinned or formed from clay. They're not metaphors. They're not symbols of agricultural fertility or moral fables. They're something far stranger. They are the reaction of the earth to crisis. When balance tips too far, when something threatens the world not spiritually, but existentially, the earth pushes back, and the earthborne are what it uses. In Greek mythology, they're the gigantes, not just big, but elemental. Born from Gaia herself after the blood of the sky, god Uranus spilled into the soil. She didn't raise them. She forged them. And they rose up not to rule, but to correct the cosmic imbalance. In Sumerian stories, they're the Anunnaki's soldiers crafted from the clay of the rivers to do the dirty work the gods didn't want to do. Not servants, not heroes, just function incarnate. In the Hebrew Bible, you find echoes of them. In the Rephaim and Nephilim, giant beings of unclear origin, sometimes divine, sometimes fallen, always wrong for the world of men. And in nearly every version of the story, they're wiped out, not by natural death, by design. Because the earthborne don't belong in peace. They're emergency measures. Historians still debate whether these tales were meant as allegories for ancient disasters, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis. But what if they're not allegories? What if they're aftershocks of memory? What if in the ancient past, before recorded history, the earth itself created defenders, not spiritual warriors, literal ones, humanoid in shape, but geological in origin, strong, silent, impervious, terrifying. Imagine beings with skin like obsidian, veins of molten light, eyes that didn't blink but smoldered, not robotic, not alive in the human sense, just awake enough to move. And when they moved, everything changed. Odd fact: in cultures across the world, there are tales of sleeping giants buried in hills, trapped beneath mountains encased in stone. The people who live near them leave offerings, not out of reverence, out of fear that one day they'll wake up. Sound familiar? Because geology tells us that mountains rise, that rock moves, that the earth has a pulse. But myth tells us that sometimes that pulse becomes form. There's a legend in the American Southwest among the Navajo and Hopi of beings who lived inside the earth, not as animals, but as defenders. When the world above was threatened, they emerged from caves to protect the surface. They were not human, and they were not kind, just necessary. You feel the ground throb gently beneath your feet now. Not a quake, a breath. And the jungle goes silent because the earth remembers. The earthborne were not meant to last. They were meant to restore. and then dissolve. But what if some of them never got the message? What if one or two remained, not fully awake, not fully gone, just resting, waiting for the next imbalance? We keep treating the planet like a dead thing, a passive backdrop for our drama. But the myths say otherwise. The myths say Earth is not a stage, it's a character. And when it needs to speak, it doesn't use language. It uses shape. Some say the megaliths of the ancient world were not built by people, but built through people, the Earth moving its own bones with our hands, using us like tools. And the earthborne, they were the prototypes, the early attempts. Full-sized, functional. Too dangerous to keep around, too useful to forget. You ever feel like a hill is watching you? That a standing stone has a presence you can't quite explain? That a mountain peak hums if you sit still long enough? Maybe that's not your imagination. Maybe it's someone older than humanity still half asleep. There are stories, quiet ones of modern construction workers hitting something deep beneath the surface. Not caves, not fossils, not ruins, shapes too regular, too complete, too unexcavatable. Reports get buried, equipment gets lost, the sites get closed, and the ground just settles back in like nothing ever happened. Because the earthborne don't want to be found. They want to be left alone until they're needed, and maybe they'll never be needed again. But if the floods return, if the fire comes, if the balance tips too far, they will rise, not to save us, not to avenge the planet, but to reset the stage. So you keep walking. And for the first time, you realize something unnerving. You're not above the earth anymore. You're inside it. And behind you, the stone shifts. Just a little, like something big just turned over in its sleep. It takes you a moment to notice the air has changed again. It's colder, yes, but not like night or altitude. It's emptier. Like the kind of cold you get in a forgotten room, one where nobody's spoken aloud in centuries. No wind. No birds. Just stillness. Like the world is holding its breath. You're standing at the edge of something not quite gone, not quite present. You've arrived at the forgotten shore of Kumari Kandam. The name sounds exotic, almost musical, doesn't it? But to some, it's not myth. It's home, or what home used to be, before the ocean decided otherwise. According to ancient Tamil legends, Kumari Kandam was a vast, vibrant landmass that once connected southern India to Antarctica. It stretched across the Indian Ocean, like a sleeping dragon, teeming with kingdoms, temples, and a culture so advanced it taught the rest of the world how to live. Then it sank, not because of war, not because of sin, but because that's what water does. It reclaims. You've probably heard of Lemuria, the old 19th century pseudo-scientific term for a lost continent in the Indian Ocean. European naturalists came up with the name to explain why lemurs were found in both Madagascar and India. The theory was debunked, of course, when plate tectonics entered the chat. But here's what's wild. Tamil legends described Kumari Kandam long before the Europeans gave it a name. Thousands of years ago, ancient Tamil texts told of lands now under the sea, of dynasties that lasted 4,000 years each, of sages, poets, and astronomers who studied stars and surf alike, of cities where knowledge wasn't written, it was sung, carved into memory through rhythm and mantra. Some believe the Sangam literature, ancient Tamil poems collected over centuries, are fragments from that lost civilization. They speak of sunken cities, submerged temples, and great migrations from the south fleeing rising seas. Historians still debate whether Kumari Kandam is a poetic metaphor for real migrations or a nationalistic myth conjured to stir cultural pride. But the sea, it says nothing. It just holds secrets. Odd fact, off the coast of Tamil Nadu lies a town called Pumpuhar. Today, it's quiet. But beneath its waves, divers have found submerged structures, stone walls, steps, and platforms clearly shaped by human hands. And they're not recent. Radiocarbon dating suggests these ruins could be more than 11,000 years old. That's older than the pyramids, older than Sumer, older than almost everything. So why don't we talk about it? Because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit our story of human progress. That tidy arc from hunter-gatherers to farmers to philosophers to astronauts. Kumari Kandam suggests another story. A civilization that rose, that taught, that recorded its memory in songs now drowned. And then nothing. No ruins we can easily reach. No texts in museums. Just language, just rhythm, just the sea. The Tamil language itself is one of the oldest living languages in the world. Still spoken, still sung, still rich with words that describe things modern tongues can't even imagine. You ever wonder why some cultures bury their knowledge in poetry? Because poetry floats. It outlives flood fire, sword, and forgetting. Maybe that's what Kumari Kandam was really doing, encoding its wisdom in rhythm, in meter, in vibration, so that even if the land disappeared, the knowledge might wash up somewhere else. In India, in Madagascar, in the corners of lost temples in Cambodia. Some believe that when Atlantis fell in the west, Kumari Kandam fell in the east. Two hemispheres, two golden ages, two arms of the same ancient body. And when the balance tipped, both slipped beneath the waves, pulling human memory with them. And what rose in their place? Amnesia, but not total, because people still dream of cities in the sea. They still dive and find stone beneath coral. They still sing songs whose meanings are long gone, but whose rhythm feels true. And maybe that's enough, because if Kumari Kandam was real, and some part of you thinks it was then, its legacy isn't just in the sea. It's in the survivors. In the stories carried north, carved into temples, whispered in rituals. In the names we still use. The food, the dance, the sun. You take a step forward now, and the earth gives way, not collapsing, but softening. Like sand yielding to a familiar foot, you look out over the imagined water, and for just a second, you see something on the horizon. A glint, a shape, not a ship. A spire, something built by people who remembered stars differently. Then it's gone. Was it memory? Hallucination? Or did Kumari Kandam just for a breath surface again? Maybe not for you, but maybe one day soon for all of us. Because the sea doesn't destroy, it preserves, and it waits. You step away from the imagined sea, but you carry its silence with you. The air shifts again, thicker now, with the scent of soil and smoke. The world around you flattens, stretches, opens into a vast plain. But this plain isn't empty. It's sculpted. Welcome to the land of the mound builders. If you grew up in the United States, chances are your history books gave this topic about a paragraph, maybe two. A few mysterious hills in Ohio. Something about dirt. Then they moved on. But what they didn't tell you is this. The mound builders were part of a civilization so vast and so old, it may rewrite what you think you know about North America. Long before Columbus, before the Vikings, before the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Mississippian kingdoms, there were people here, builders, designers, and maybe even engineers of memory. They didn't use stone. They used earth. Massive structures, geometric, aligned, layered. They built mounds, yes, but also plazas, observatories, and causeways stretching for miles. All of it done with no beasts of burden, no metal tools, and no written language. And yet, the alignments, the symmetry, the intention, they weren't building for shelter. They were building for something else. In Ohio, you'll find Serpent Mound, a fallen 300-foot-long earthen effigy that winds through the landscape in a precise, deliberate curve. Its head aligns with the setting sun on the summer solstice. Its coils mirror lunar phases. This is not random. This is designed beyond survival, and it's old. Older than the Mississippians, older than Cahokia. Some estimates place it as far back as 5,000 years ago. That's Stonehenge territory. And it's not alone. There are thousands of mounds across the Midwest and the South, many of them destroyed by farming roads and progress. But satellite imaging reveals their ghosts, shapes too regular to be accidents. Circles, squares, spirals, memory made of mud. But who were the mound builders? That's where things get murky. Because there wasn't one group. This wasn't a single tribe. It was a network, interconnected cultures, trading, communicating, passing ideas like torchlight from one river to another. From the Poverty Point culture in Louisiana to the Hopewell in Ohio to the great city of Cahokia near modern-day St. Louis, there was a long arc of civilization that thrived before the arrival of Europeans and then vanished, not into war, into forgetting. The early colonists couldn't believe Native Americans had built such things, so they invented stories. It must have been Vikings, lost tribes of Israel, Atlantis refugees. They couldn't fathom that the land had its own architects, people who worked with earth instead of against it, who built in harmony with the sky, the stars, and the rivers. People who remembered something older. There's a theory, quiet fringe, but growing, that the mound builders were preserving not just cosmology, but legacy. That they were the inheritors of something pre-flood. That the mounds were markers, not graves, not homes, but signposts to a world that was erased. Odd fact, some of the largest mounds in North America contain no bodies, no artifacts, just layer upon layer of soil, carefully compacted, perfectly shaped, aligned with astronomical events. Why? Why spend decades, maybe centuries, building massive structures that don't house the dead or shelter the living, unless they were building for the earth itself? There's a resonance to these mounds, literally. Some have acoustic properties that amplify sound. Others seem to hum at certain frequencies. Some people have reported feeling pressure in their ears while standing atop them, as if the ground is remembering something and wants you to listen. But we don't. We plow them under, build parking lots on them, forget, because that's the easiest thing to do with inconvenient truths. Historians still debate whether the mound builder civilizations rose independently or were seeded by older knowledge, perhaps carried north after catastrophic floods. Some suggest there's no connection to lost continents, no grand mystery, just human ingenuity. But what if human ingenuity isn't the point? What if human memory is? The mounds weren't meant to impress. They were meant to preserve a shape, a line, a frequency, a whisper across soil, maybe even a warning. Cahokia, the largest known mound city, had as many people as London in the 1200s. It was a metropolis complete with plazas, markets, and a solar calendar. And yet it was abandoned by 1400. No war, no fire, just silence, a reset, a closed tab in the browser of time. And beneath all of it, those layered mounds, still holding whatever message we stopped trying to read. You climb one, now slowly. The incline is subtle, but your breath quickens. Not from effort, from knowing. You reach the top. Nothing happens, and yet everything does. You feel it. Not sound, not sight. Just a deep hum, like the land itself saying you're almost ready. And then it's gone. Not because it left, because it knows when not to speak. Because the mound builders were never trying to impress us. They were trying to remind us. You descend from the mound, and with every step, the air grows thinner, like climbing down into a whisper. You feel lighter, not physically, but as if your memories aren't as tightly glued to you anymore. That unsettling freedom, the kind you feel in dreams, where gravity doesn't quite work. Because now you're drifting into the realm of the sky beings, not angels, not aliens, something else, something older, and possibly native to Earth, but aligned with the stars. These weren't invaders from above. They weren't ancient astronauts in the modern sci-fi sense. The people who spoke of them didn't call them machines. They called them family, guides, watchers, givers of knowledge. You've probably heard of the Dogon people of Mali. For decades, their oral traditions fascinated anthropologists, not because of what they didn't know, but because of what they shouldn't have. They described Sirius B, a white dwarf companion, starred as Sirius A, the brightest star in the sky. The Dogon knew it was there. They said it was dense, small, and invisible to the naked eye. Western science didn't confirm that until the 1970s. How did they know? The Dogon say they were taught by beings from Sirius called the Nomo. Amphibious, luminous, and incomprehensibly wise. Most historians today dismiss this. They say the Dogon picked it up from missionaries or from French explorers. A coincidence, a contamination of myth. But the story feels older than that, and the Dogon aren't the only ones. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were semi-divine sages, fish-cloaked beings who emerged from the sea after the flood to restore civilization. In Mesoamerican myth, Quetzalcoatl came down from the heavens to teach language law and astronomy. In Vedic literature, the Devas and Asuras battled across heaven and earth with flying machines, energy weapons, and complex ethical codes. Even the Bible has the Watcher's angels sent to observe who then broke the rules, fell in love, and taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Sound familiar? The sky beings never forced anything on us. They didn't conquer. They offered fire, metalwork, language, mathematics, astronomy, but always with a cost, because knowledge once given can't be ungiven. And maybe that's why they vanished. Not in ships, in memory. Some researchers call this the civilizing myth. They say early societies needed to explain sudden leaps in understanding, so they invented sky gods. But here's the problem. The leaps aren't evenly spread. They cluster across oceans, across continents, sudden bursts of sophistication in building language cosmology, and then silence. Almost like someone turned on a light, then flicked it off again. Odd fact, in several Aboriginal Australian traditions, there are tales of star ancestors who arrived on flying canoes, taught sacred law, and then left promising to return when humanity was ready. They weren't feared. They were respected. And that's the key difference. Modern alien lore leans toward horror abductions, experiments, cold probes in cold places. But ancient stories, they're different. They don't describe beings of conquest, but of co-creation. Maybe they weren't extraterrestrials. Maybe they were ultra-terrestrials, native to this realm, but vibrating at a frequency we forgot how to hear. Beings of light, not biology. But they weren't flawless. Some myths say they became corrupted, They fell in love with humans, broke rules, gave us knowledge we weren't emotionally mature enough to wield, and then flood, fire, silence, as if the earth itself hit the mute button. Or maybe the sky beings did. Out of grief or guilt, historians still debate the role of these figures in myth. Archetypes, astronomical metaphors, psychological projections. Fine, but it's curious how consistent they are. Not just flying beings, but teaching ones. You ever wonder why the earliest temples align with the stars? Why pyramids mimic Orion? Why megalithic sites whisper the math of the moon? Maybe it's because someone taught us. Someone whose classroom was the sky. And then when the bell rang, they vanished. There's a theory half mystical, half mathematical, that some of us are still tuned to their frequency. That moments of deep insight invention or strange inspiration come not from within, but from a kind of signal tower left behind. Maybe that's what déjà vu really is, not a memory of the past, but a reminder from elsewhere. And sometimes that reminder takes shape. There are modern sightings, of course. Lights that defy gravity, geometric craft, beings that walk like us but don't move like us, stories whispered by shamans, dreamers, and people you'd never expect. And those people, they always say the same thing. They weren't trying to hurt me. They wanted me to remember something. But no one ever remembers what. You step into a clearing now, and above you, the sky opens impossibly wide, as if space got a little closer, just for you. The stars shimmer brighter, sharper. You feel them, not watching, inviting. The sky beings don't knock on doors. They wait for you to look up. And when you do, they whisper, "Are you ready this time?" You don't remember walking into the next space. One moment, you're under stars, feeling the breath of the sky itself on your skin. And the next, you're enclosed, not confined. Enclosed, like stepping into the center of a maze built from time and dust. And in the center, you find the forgotten gods, not the popular ones. Not Zeus or Osiris or Odin. No marble statues or epic poems. These gods are older, stranger. They don't have names, only vibrations. They're not angry or loving. They're functional. They exist to maintain something you can't yet see. And once, long ago, we knew how to speak to them. The ancients didn't always imagine gods as personalities. Sometimes they were forces, equations, archetypes given ritual. The Sumerians had me, not a deity, but divine principles encoded into the universe. The Egyptians worshiped Ma'at, the balance itself, not a goddess who acted, but a law that was. In Mesoamerica, the Maya saw time itself as a deity, not the passing of hours, but a living circuit, a presence you could fall out of if you weren't careful. Their calendars weren't just for scheduling. They were tools for harmony. But here's the strange part. So many of these forgotten gods weren't gods at all. They were systems. They didn't demand sacrifice. They didn't wield thunderbolts. They didn't sit on golden thrones. They pulsed through numbers, patterns, geometry. They emerged from water, from stars, from breath. They didn't rule. They regulated. And somewhere along the way, we stopped listening to them. We anthropomorphized the divine, gave it faces, voices, squabbles, soap opera, love triangles. We traded circuits for stories, harmony for hierarchy. And the original gods, they faded. Not in anger, just obsolescence, like a tuning fork placed on a table where no one plays music anymore, but traces remain. Odd fact. In ancient Greece, before Zeus and his rowdy crew took over, there were whispers of proto-Genoi primordial beings like chaos, Gaia Nyx and Kronos. They didn't have temples. They didn't want prayers. They were existence, darkness, time, earth, sea, and when the Olympians arrived, they were pushed into mythic storage. But you can still feel them in silence, in starlight, in the strange stillness before a storm. These were the programmers of the cosmos, and their code still runs in the background. Historians still argue whether early humans believed in gods at all, or whether they just experienced the universe as alive and invented stories later. But some of the earliest symbols, the ones we still don't understand, don't depict people. They depict principles: the spiral, the eye, the serpent, the double helix before we had DNA, the cross before Christ, the labyrinth before Minos. Not inventions, reminders. And in some cultures, the gods didn't fall, they hid. In Zoroastrianism, the original divinities were moral frequencies, concepts like truth, order, and wisdom, personified not for worship, but for alignment. The point wasn't obedience. The point was resonance. In Polynesian myth, some deities were known only through chant, their names sung in tones that could change weatherfish migration, even fate. And in the Aboriginal Dreamtime creation wasn't a past event. It's still happening right now through song, gesture, and respect. You ever wonder why some rituals are silent? Why certain symbols appear across continents? Why numbers like 3, 7, 9, and 12 show up in sacred texts worldwide? Maybe we weren't worshiping gods. Maybe we were remembering protocols. The forgotten gods weren't jealous or kind or cruel. They were interfaces, gateways to something vast and neutral. Not good or evil, just true. And we, modern, noisy, distracted as we are, have forgotten how to use them. Or worse, we remember just enough to misuse them. You feel it now, don't you? This room of the forgotten gods isn't made of walls. It's made of principles. Every surface hums with golden ratio spirals, Fibonacci curves, sacred geometry you don't consciously understand but instinctively recognize. You run your fingers along a line in the floor and feel it respond not with movement, but with presence, something that was always watching, something that doesn't care if you believe in it, because it's not a belief, it's structure. Some say this is what Atlantis really was, a civilization not ruled by kings but by codes, ethical harmonics, a city tuned to cosmic law. And when it drifted off key, when the notes soured, the city collapsed not from war, but from dissonance. And the gods, the real ones, they didn't punish, they simply withdrew, like a symphony folding itself back into silence. But maybe they're not gone. Maybe they're still here in the background radiation of dreams, in the pause between thoughts, in the hum of ancient temples no one dares rebuild. Maybe all it takes to hear them again is to tune in. And maybe that's why you're here. Not to ask for miracles, but to remember the frequency. You close your eyes, and for just a moment you hear it. Not words, not sound. Just order, and with it a feeling. You knew this once. Then the hum fades, but it leaves a shape behind. A symbol, a number, a rhythm, waiting for you to recognize it. Because the forgotten gods don't ask for worship. They ask for understanding. And maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready to begin again. You leave the chamber of forgotten gods, but not empty-handed. The hum still echoes nested somewhere between your heartbeat and your memory. It's not a song. It's a shape folded into you now, like a fingerprint you didn't know was yours. And as you walk, the world sharpens. Not brighter, not louder, just more real. You're entering Gobekli Tepe. No, not the ruins you've seen in photographs. not the excavation site in Turkey with the T-shaped pillars and perfectly carved animal reliefs. That's the version for tourists and textbooks. Tonight you're walking into the real one, the one that hasn't been fully unearthed yet, the one still dreaming under dust. Located in southeastern Anatolia, Gobekli Tepe is often called the world's oldest temple. Built over 11,000 years ago, thousands of years before Stonehenge, before the pyramids, before even the idea of agriculture, it rewrote history the moment it was discovered. Because according to the traditional timeline, people back then were hunter-gatherers. No farming, no writing, no permanent settlements, and yet they built this massive stone pillars arranged in circles, some weighing up to 20 tons. Carved with animals, snakes, foxes, vultures that seem to mean something even if no one knows exactly what. There's no evidence anyone lived there. No homes, no hearths, just structure. Which begs the question, who spends that much effort to build something they don't live in? Answer: a civilization that values memory over comfort. Odd fact, Gobekli Tepe wasn't destroyed. It was buried on purpose, filled in carefully with debris and earth, as if someone wanted to preserve it for the future, but also hide it from prying eyes. And this was long before modern record keeping. So why build something so monumental, then erase it? Unless the erasure was the message. Historians still don't agree on its purpose. Was it a Temple A ritual site? An astronomical observatory? Or was it a vault, not of objects, but of meaning? Some theorists suggest Gobekli Tepe was a meeting point, a signal, a reset beacon. Built just after the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to glacial conditions that may have wiped out earlier civilizations. So maybe Gobekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of civilization. Maybe it was the memorial to one. And that's the thought that hits hardest. What if the people who built it weren't building up toward something, but trying to rebuild what was lost? You can feel it in the stones. They're not just decorative. They're aligned to stars, to seasons, to frequencies buried in the rock itself. Some scholars believe the positioning of the pillars may map out constellations or even track the precession of the equinoxes. Others say they encode stories not in language, but in placement, shape, vibration. A fox on one pillar, a circle of vultures on another. The handbag motif seen not only here, but thousands of miles away in Mesoamerican and Mesopotamian art. Coincidence, or the footprint of a forgotten code? As you walk the invisible corridors between the standing stones, you notice something strange. The space feels intentional. It directs your body. Your breath adjusts. Your thoughts slow. It's like walking through a language you don't know how to speak, but understand anyway. That's the thing about Gobekli Tepe. It's not for the eyes. It's for the nervous system. It speaks in pressure, in angles, in the pause between glyphs. And maybe that's what makes it so terrifying. Because whoever built it understood things we're only now starting to rediscover. Like how certain shapes change brainwaves. Like how stone can carry vibration. Like how memory isn't just stored in the mind, but in the land. You ever notice how a place can feel ancient, even if no one tells you it is? That's not imagination. That's resonance. And Gobekli Tepe is full of it. There's a theory quietly whispered in archaeology circles that we've only uncovered about 5% of the site, that under the hills around it lie dozens more circles, more messages, more chapters of a book we don't know how to read yet, and buried even deeper. The reason it was all built in the first place. Maybe the builders knew another flood was coming. Maybe they didn't survive it, but maybe they knew someone would. Maybe they knew you would. And maybe that's why they buried it, not to hide it forever, but to protect it until we were ready. You stand at the center of the circle now. The stones rise around you tall and silent, And you don't feel small. You feel expected, like a guest arriving late to a meeting that never ended. The stone closest to you hums softly in the wind. Not a voice, a tone, not a song, a signal. You can't decode it, but your bones can. And somewhere deep inside, you remember. You've been here before? Not in this life, but maybe the last one or the one before that. Gobekli Tepe isn't just old, it's awake. And it's waiting for someone who can finally hear what it's been saying for 11,000 years. So you place your hand on the nearest stone, close your eyes, and listen. You don't remember pulling your hand away from the stone. You only know that when you open your eyes, the light has shifted. It's softer, cooler. You're no longer in the dry stillness of Gobekli Tepe's hilltop. The air is thick now, fragrant with salt and damp moss. It feels like time has gone soft again, like someone pressed pause on the stars. You're walking through a place whispered about in hushed tones by both scholars and sailors. The long-lost realm of High Brazil. No, not Brazil. The country, though, the name's not unrelated. This High Brazil is a phantom island said to lie off the west coast of Ireland, hidden by mist and magic seen only once every 7 years. A place that shows up on medieval maps with surprising consistency, yet disappears whenever anyone actually tries to reach it. It's the Atlantis of the Atlantic, and in some ways maybe even older. For centuries, High Brazil was thought to be real. Mariners describe seeing it a dark shape on the horizon, perfectly round, often ringed with a wall or canal. A few even claimed to set foot on its shores. They spoke of towers made of glass, glowing stones, strange animals, and golden domes. Others said they found scholars there, silent, ageless men, who communicated without speaking and healed wounds with light. Then the island would vanish. Poof. Gone. Sound familiar? High Brazil isn't the only vanishing island in world mythology. The Welsh had Contre'r Gwaelod, a sunken kingdom in Cardigan Bay. The Japanese speak of Horai, a floating paradise where time barely passes. The Norse knew of Lyngvi, a land that existed just outside perception. Historians still debate whether High Brazil was a real place misidentified by ancient sailors, or simply a myth carried on the fog. But what if it was something else entirely? Not a physical island, but a dimensional echo. Something that existed, and maybe still exists on a different frequency. A place that slips into our world when the cosmic tides are right. A thin place where reality buckles just enough for memory to leak through. You ever stood in thick fog and felt like you weren't alone? You ever stared at the sea long enough to think it might stare back? Maybe you brushed against High Brazil. In Celtic tradition, High Brazil wasn't just a place of wonder, it was a place of origin. The land where the first knowledge came from. A sacred homeland lost not through war or flood, but through incompatibility. Its vibration too high for a corrupted world to hold. That's the chilling part. It didn't sink. We fell away from it. There's a story told by a few Irish mystics once long ago. Humanity lived in perfect resonance with High Brazil. We shared knowledge freely across the veils. Dreams were more than dreams, they were visits. And when we built in alignment with that island's light. But something changed. We forgot. We grew loud, fragmented, linear, and the island, it just faded. Some say it still tries to reach us. That certain dreams, recurring ones of impossible towers and silent oceans, are messages from High Brazil. That flashes of genius, bursts of inspiration, even sudden healing may be echoes of contact. Odd fact, in 1980, a U.S. Air Force officer involved in the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident claimed to receive a series of binary codes after touching a strange craft. When decoded, one message read, "Origin High Brazil." Coincidence? Probably, but still. There are legends that say High Brazil was the last sanctuary of a pre-flood race. That when Atlantis sank and Lemuria shattered, High Brazil remained untouched. Protected not by walls, but by vibration. It doesn't hide, it waits. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for us to tune back in. Some claim that the island represents a collective memory, something seeded into our consciousness to guide us back when we're lost. Others believe it's a real place, accessible not by ship or plane, but by alignment of heart of mind, of rhythm, and those who find it, they're never quite the same. You walk a little farther now through the heavy mist. You don't see the island, but you feel it. The air tastes like ozone. The horizon pulses. Your breath moves slower, as if adjusting to a place that doesn't rush. You don't hear voices, but you feel approval, like something old is watching you, not judging, just taking note. Maybe you're close. Maybe you're not supposed to find High Brazil yet, but it's there, just beyond the edge of forgetting. A signal waiting for someone who can remember how to listen sideways. So you pause, you close your eyes, and for just a breath, you feel the ocean move, not the water, but the space above it. As if something massive just turned over in its sleep. You open your eyes, nothing's changed, and everything has, because High Brazil isn't an island. It's a memory of what harmony used to feel like, and maybe we'll feel it again. You keep walking though. Now the ground beneath you feels less like earth and more like thought, soft, uncertain, shifting with every step, as if deciding whether you deserve to stand on it. The fog of High Brazil fades, but the sense of presence doesn't. You're not alone here. You've stepped into the world of the Nephilim. Even if you've never read the book of Genesis, you've probably heard the name. Giant beings. Half human. Half something else. There were giants in the earth in those days, the text says, and also after that. That's it. Just a line. No explanation. No follow-up. And then the flood. The Bible doesn't linger on the Nephilim, but other texts do, books that didn't make it into the final cut. The book of Enoch, for example, tells us that the Nephilim were the offspring of the Watcher's angels who descended to earth and broke the cardinal rule, do not interfere. But they did. They saw human women and chose to take them. And from that union came something not quite human, not quite angel, something impossible. The Nephilim were giants, yes, but more than that, they were beings of knowledge. They brought metallurgy, weaponry, enchantments, the secrets of the stars. And with that knowledge came chaos, war, corruption, an imbalance so great even heaven couldn't ignore it. So the flood came, not just to cleanse the world, but to erase the error, to drown memory itself. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The Nephilim are said to have survived. Maybe not all of them, maybe not in form, but in lineage. Some traditions say their blood mixed into royal families, that kings and conquerors carry a glimmer of that celestial spark, that the builders of Babylon, the pharaohs, the founders of empires, they weren't just ambitious. They were descended from something older and something unfinished. Historians still debate the meaning of these myths. Are the Nephilim just metaphors for human arrogance, for the dangers of playing God? Maybe. But why then do so many cultures have stories that match? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the title character is 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, and a giant. In Greek myth, the Titans, vast, powerful beings, ruled before the gods. In Norse legend, The Jotnar, the frost giants, were the first beings to emerge from the void. Different names, same idea. A race that predates us, surpasses us, and haunts us. And in every story, we rise from their ashes. Odd fact, there are dozens of reports from the 19th and early 20th centuries of giant human skeletons found across North America. Some in burial mounds, others in deep caves. 9, 10, even 12 feet tall. Most of the bones disappeared. The stories were labeled hoaxes, and the official records, gone. But the stories remain. You ever feel like humanity is carrying a weight it doesn't quite understand? Like we're haunted not by what we've done, but by what we're made of. Maybe the Nephilim weren't punished for existing. Maybe we were punished for remembering them. You walk deeper into the misty plain, and a shape emerges. Not a body, not a ghost. Just a shadow, so tall, so still, it feels like a mountain that learned how to breathe. You don't move. It doesn't need to, because the Nephilim don't ask for worship. They ask for reckoning. What happens when the divine and the earthly mix? You get brilliance, but you also get imbalance. That's why they were wiped out. Not because they were evil, because they were too much, too tall, too powerful, too ahead of their time, and perhaps still around. Not in the literal sense, but in the traits we can't quite explain. In the geniuses, the tyrants, the dreamers, the warriors. In the persistent myth of the chosen bloodline. You ever wonder why so many ancient kings claim descent from gods? Maybe they weren't lying. Maybe they were leaking the truth. And maybe so are you. The ground here hums with heaviness. Like gravity has doubled not because of mass, but because of memory. You stand in their footprint now, not just metaphorically, literally. A depression in the earth, larger than a swimming pool, not from erosion, from a step. And around you, the wind dies down, because the Nephilim are listening, and they want to know, do you still carry their spark? Or have you forgotten everything they bled for? The footprint behind you feels like a warning, or maybe a reminder. Either way, you don't look back. You walk on the air, cooling further, not with altitude this time, but depth. The path narrows, not physically, cosmically, like your reality is being funneled into something tighter, more precise. You're about to meet the builders of Nan Madol. If you've never heard of Nan Madol, don't feel bad. Most people haven't, which is strange considering it's one of the most mysterious ancient sites on Earth, an oceanic ruin so bizarre, so impossible, it barely seems real. And yet it exists. On the tiny island of Pohnpei, deep in the Pacific Ocean, lies this megalithic marvel, more than 90 artificial islets built on a coral reef, constructed from massive basalt columns, some weighing as much as 50 tons. These aren't just big rocks. They're logically stacked in walls, platforms, and tombs, all in the middle of the sea. There are no quarries on the island, no metal tools, no draft animals, no wheeled transport. And yet the builders of Nan Madol moved thousands of tons of volcanic stone over water and arranged them with precision. And we have no idea how. The site has been called the Venice of the Pacific. But that's poetic. Nan Madol doesn't feel like a city. It feels like a machine. Its layout is geometric, intentional, and intimidating. The waterways between platforms are too narrow for boats, too deep for carts. Movement within the city doesn't make sense unless you're not human, or unless the city wasn't meant for daily life, but for ritual or something even stranger. There's a local legend that says the city was built by twin sorcerers, brothers named Olisipa and Olosopa, who flew the stones into place using levitation. Yes, levitation. It's easy to dismiss as myth until you realize How many other cultures say exactly the same thing about their megaliths? The Inca say the stones of Sacsayhuaman were sung into place. The Egyptians spoke of harmonics used to lift limestone. The Tibetans have similar whispers. And Nan Madol, it's built from hexagonal columnar basalt, naturally formed geometric shapes, but so regular they feel artificial. When stacked, they don't just stand, they lock. It's a city of stone that fits together like DNA, and no one knows who built it or why. Archaeologists date it to about 1,000 years ago, but even the local oral histories suggest it was rebuilt over something much older, a sacred zone, an island not meant for ordinary humans, but for something other. Historians still argue whether Nan Madol was a seat of royalty, a religious hub, or a place of exile. But the energy of the place suggests something deeper, older. You don't build a floating stone city on coral for politics. You do it to anchor something invisible. Odd fact. The underwater topography near Nan Madol suggests sunken extensions, more ruins, more roads descending into the ocean floor. No formal dives have mapped it all. Funding is difficult. Interest is low. Convenient, right? Because what if Nan Madol isn't just ancient? What if it's pre-human? What if it wasn't built to serve people, but to contain something? Some say the basalt acts like a resonator, that when arranged properly, it channels frequency, sound water even thought. That Nan Madol is less of a city and more of a tuning device. What was it tuning, and why was it drowned? The water levels in the area have risen, but not that much. So maybe the builders of Nan Madol didn't lose their city to nature. Maybe they offered it back to the sea, to time, to something watching from below. You step closer to the imagined threshold where land and lagoon blur. The coral beneath your feet doesn't crunch, it hums. The stone walls rise at odd angles, not aggressive, but expectant. Like a throat preparing to speak. You stand in what would have been a plaza, and suddenly the geometry around you feels alive. Each pillar, each wall, each channel, a piece of a larger language, not written, not spoken, but felt, like a chord held just out of reach. And you realize something that tightens your spine. Nan Madol wasn't just a structure. It was a circuit, a processor, a place built to receive. From the sky, from the sea, from beneath reality. Who knows? Maybe it was a memory vault. Maybe it was a gateway. Maybe it was a lock keeping something in or out. You ever wonder why so many advanced structures are underwater now? Not just because of rising seas, because they were put there deliberately, to sleep, to wait, to cool down. And maybe Nan Madol is one of the last places where the code still runs. A backup system, a forgotten terminal, not broken, just hibernating. And maybe your presence here activates something, not a trap, a query. The stones seem to lean in. They're not asking what you want. They're asking what you remember, and your breath catches. Because you do remember, not the facts. The feeling of standing in a city not built by hands, but by pattern. Of knowing your role in something cosmic, ancient, and quietly terrifying. And for a second, just one, you understand it all. Then it's gone. The mist thickens. The sea goes still. And Nan Madol sleeps again, waiting for the next question. The sea retreats behind you with no waves, no farewell, just stillness. You press onward, though now each step feels heavier, not from fatigue, but from density. As if you're moving through layers, not of space, but of time. You've crossed into the forgotten territory of the Shining Ones. You've heard the name before. Maybe in passing. Maybe in conspiracy circles. But buried beneath the speculation is a strange, shimmering truth so radiant you almost can't look at it directly. The Shining Ones weren't just gods. They were light. Or rather, they wore light the way we wear skin. They show up across cultures under different names. Tuatha De Danann in Irish lore, Devas in the Vedas, Aesir in Norse myth, the Shemsu-Hor of Egypt, the luminous beings in Eastern traditions. Not beings of flesh and bone, but of frequency, brilliance, resonant presence. They weren't always seen, but when they were, they glowed, and they taught. In myth after myth, they arrive at the edges of chaos and leave behind knowledge, order, and always architecture. The Shining Ones built things, not cities in the modern sense, but centers, places where reality bends, where sound becomes shape, where stars are echoed in stone. They weren't just builders. They were tuners, adjusting the earth itself like an instrument coaxing harmony out of the dirt. Odd fact, many of the megalithic sites in Europe, Newgrange, Avebury, Callanish, are older than the pyramids and aligned with astronomical events down to the hour. They were built by cultures with no writing, no metallurgy, and no clear reason to care that much about the sky, unless someone taught them why it mattered. The Tuatha De Danann, in particular, are described as arriving in Ireland from the sky in a mist. They brought knowledge tools and 4 sacred objects: a stone, a spear, a sword, and a cauldron. These weren't weapons. They were frequencies, allegories for power, will, resonance, and memory. And then they disappeared. Some say underground, others say into the hollow hills, which sounds poetic until you realize how many ancient mounds and stone circles were constructed above cavern systems, as if something below was being honored or protected. Historians still debate the Tuatha De Danann. Some say they were real people mythologized over time. Others say they were symbols of nature, seasonal cycles, fertility. But why the light? Why the shimmering skin? The radiant eyes? The ethereal presence? And why are they always leaving? The Shining Ones don't conquer. They arrive, illuminate, and withdraw. They show up in times of transition, as if responding to some silent signal from Earth itself. We're ready, and maybe, when we forget what they taught, they fade. Some believe the Shining Ones are interdimensional, that they never left, just shifted phase, that sacred sites and dream states are how we sometimes tune back into their frequency. You ever meet someone who doesn't seem entirely here? Not spacey, not distracted, just not quite bound by the same rules. Maybe they carry a flicker of that light. Maybe they remember something we've all forgotten. Here's the unsettling part. Some traditions claim the Shining Ones are us from the future. A fully realized version of humanity returned to guide itself through collapse. Not aliens, not angels, graduates, reaching back into their own timeline with gloves of gold and voices made of wind. And maybe that's why they never stay, because they know this isn't their stop anymore. They're just checking in, making sure the seed didn't die in the dark. You walk into a circle of trees now, tall, ancient, their trunks pulsing with quiet presence. There are no ruins, no signs, and yet the ground beneath your feet tingles like it remembers who used to stand here. You raise your hand, and for a moment, the light filters through the branches in a perfect spiral. Not coincidence, invitation. The Shining Ones don't speak in words. They speak in alignment. And this place, wherever it is aligned. You feel your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and then you see it, not with your eyes, with your attention. A shimmer, a presence, just at the edge of perception, like someone made of sunbeams decided to sit beside you. They say nothing, but somehow you know exactly what they mean. Keep going. You're almost there. And just like that, the shimmer dissolves. Not into nothing, into everywhere. You blink. The trees are just trees again. The breeze is just breeze, but something in you is brighter now. Not your skin, your memory. Because the shining ones don't leave behind cities or scrolls. They leave behind echoes. Inside us, waiting for the moment we shine too. You leave the grove, slowly, like stepping out of a warm bath and into cold air. The shimmer lingers behind your eyes, like an afterimage from staring at the sun too long. But this time, you didn't look at the sun. The sun looked at you. Now, the path dips downward again, not into darkness, but into shadow. There's a difference. Darkness is absence. Shadow is presence concealed. You've entered the land of Zep Tepi. The name means the first time in ancient Egyptian. Not a metaphor. Not a poetic flourish. A literal era. Before the pharaohs. Before the pyramids. Before dynasties were carved into stone. Zep Tepi was the golden age. A time when gods walked among men. And knowledge wasn't learned, but remembered. A time when the Nile didn't just flood, it sang. When the sky was a road map, and the earth was a machine tuned to its frequencies. And then it ended, but not by accident. In Egyptian mythology, Zep Tepi begins with Ptah, the creator who speaks the world into being. Then Thoth, the architect of knowledge. Then Osiris, Isis, Horus, the gods who walk the earth and shape civilization. These weren't gods in the way we think of gods. They were engineers of order, programmers of time, each one representing a function, a frequency, a piece of the operating system that governed life. And they didn't rule forever. They withdrew. They stepped back and left the world in human hands. The temple walls at Edfu, Dendera, Abydos, covered in glyphs, speak of this forgotten time. Of the followers of Horus' semi-divine beings who carried wisdom from a previous world. Of great floods, of rebuilding, of the original primeval mounds from which civilization rose. But the deeper you read, the stranger it gets, because Zep Tepi doesn't sound like a beginning. It sounds like a recovery, a reboot after a catastrophe. And if that's true, it suggests something devastating. Egypt wasn't the first. It was the inheritance, the careful child of something older, now gone. Odd fact, the Great Sphinx shows signs of water erosion, deep vertical channels along its body. Yet Egypt's climate hasn't seen consistent rainfall for over 9,000 years. That would date the Sphinx to long before the dynastic era. Mainstream archaeologists debate this fiercely, but the evidence mounts. And the stories, they've been telling us all along. The ancient texts describe the island of the egg, a place of birth and death lost beneath the Nile. A city of light where sky beings descended. A pillar of fire. A serpent of knowledge. A technology of harmony. None of this fits into textbooks, so it gets ignored. But Zep Tepi doesn't care if we believe in it. It's still humming in the background, hidden in the proportions of the pyramids, etched in the layout of temple halls, echoed in the rituals still practiced by those who've kept the thread unbroken. Historians often say the Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. But what if they weren't? What if they were obsessed with before time became a prison, before memory became mythology, before forgetting became a habit? You ever wonder why the Egyptians built for permanence? Why their temples and tombs were meant to last thousands of years? Because they weren't just building for their time. They were leaving notes for a time like ours. They knew that we'd forget, that the flood would come again, not of water, but of noise. That meaning would drown in distraction. So they carved reminders into stone, geometry, myth, star maps, anchors waiting to be rediscovered. And now you're here, standing between pylons of imagined granite, listening to the air press down like memory. And you can almost hear it, the pulse of Zep Tepi. Not in the past, but in the pattern. There's a rhythm to this place, a spatial intelligence. The stones around you don't just stand, they speak. Not in language, but in measure. Ratios that mirror the human body. Alignments that trace Orion's belt. Corridors that funnel sound and intention. It's not architecture, it's orchestration. And you're standing in the music. You press your palm to a cool imaginary wall, and you feel it not ancient, but active. Like a switch waiting for someone to remember which direction to flip it. Zep Tepi wasn't a myth. It was a mode, and maybe it's still running. Not everywhere, but in certain places and in certain people. People who remember too much. People who dream in geometry. People like you, because the first time isn't over. It's just hidden behind the idea that there was only one, and somewhere far below the Nile, or the Amazon, or the Arctic ice, that old light is still glowing, waiting to rise again. When we finally stop worshiping power and start listening to pattern, you blink and the imagined walls of Zep Tepi ripple away like silk. The pulse lingers, but the architecture dissolves. No bricks, no columns, just air so quiet you start to hear your own thoughts echo, and not all of them are yours. Because now you've entered the Hall of Records, not the one buried under the Sphinx, though some say that's exactly where it is. No, this one isn't made of stone or scrolls. It's not even a place. It's a concept, a frequency, a library encoded into the structure of consciousness. You've heard whispers of it under many names: the Akashic Records, the Tablets of Thoth, the Great Memory, the Mirror Hall. It doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is this: it holds everything. Every thought ever thought, every emotion ever felt, every civilization that rose and fell, whether remembered by history or not, including the ones you've been walking through. The Hall of Records isn't accessed by key or map. It's accessed by alignment, through dreams, trance, music, sometimes in the final moments before sleep, when your mind slips sideways and something else steps in. You've probably visited it before. You just didn't know what to call it. The Egyptians believed in a space called the Duat, an afterlife, not of clouds and harps, but of navigation, a realm structured like a puzzle filled with gates guardians and the final weighing of the heart. But what they were describing may not have been the afterlife. It may have been the underlying life, the root OS. The Hall of Records isn't just a storage unit for dusty civilizations. It's a living archive, updating, constantly reflecting not just events, but the meanings behind them. And somewhere in there is you. Not your name or your birth date, your signature, the pattern of your thought, your rhythm, your essence. Every time you remember something you've never learned, every time you dream of a place you've never been, every time you sense that something more is trying to reach you, that's the Hall of Records tapping you on the shoulder. Odd fact, ancient mystics like Edgar Cayce spoke of a library beneath the paws of the Sphinx that held the lost wisdom of Atlantis, Lemuria, and even pre-human visitors. Modern scholars scoffed. But in 1993, ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies beneath the Sphinx chambers and voids that haven't been excavated to this day. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe those chambers aren't physical libraries, but access points, architectural interfaces to the hall, not a collection of scrolls, a portal for memory. And perhaps every ancient temple pyramid or stone circle is just that, a physical attempt to reach something non-physical, to tune into a bandwidth that holds the unbroken story. But here's the part they never tell you. The hall doesn't just store memory. It responds, it teaches, and sometimes it tests. You walk now through imagined corridors of light and shadow. No walls, but boundaries all the same. You don't see doors, but you feel thresholds, moments where the air thickens, not with heat, but with intention. Each one asks something of you. Will you remember what you were before this life? Will you own the mistakes that echo backward through time? Will you carry the memories of those who can't? The deeper you go, the stranger the rules become. Time bends, causality unravels. You're not just moving forward. You're being moved by a current of memory older than language. And then you hear it. A voice, not a whisper, not a boom, a tone, as if someone rang a bell in the back of your DNA. It doesn't tell you anything. It shows you. Moments flash across your inner eye, civilizations, not just crumbling, but repeating. The same mistakes, the same innovations, the same hubris, again and again. And you realize something unsettling. The Hall of Records isn't a museum. It's a loop detector, a place that stores patterns to warn against repetition, not punishment. Prevention. Every flood myth, every sky god, every buried city, every stone that hums, they're not decorations. They're flags. Warnings wrapped in beauty, memory encoded in myth. And you're finally starting to see the picture. You're not walking through lost civilizations. You're walking through a diagnosis. Humanity has had this chance before, and before that, and before that. And the hall has stored every attempt, every blueprint, every fall. It doesn't judge. It just waits for someone who sees the loop and decides to break it. You stop. The corridor ahead vanishes. Behind you, there's nothing. Only now, and in that stillness, the hall gives you one gift. A phrase, so quiet you barely hear it, but so deep it imprints itself on your bones. Remember forward. And just like that, it's gone. Not closed. Just dimmed like a screensaver waiting for input. You're back in your body, in your breath, in your time. But you're not alone anymore. You carry the map now, not in your hand, in your pattern. Because the Hall of Records isn't for scholars, it's for carriers. And tonight, it's for you. When you step out of the Hall of Records, the world feels unnaturally quiet. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that follows a revelation too large for words. You're back on familiar ground, but the familiarity is only skin deep. Everything hums differently now, and beneath your feet lies one of the strangest, most controversial, and most whispered about ancient enigmas of all, the Bosnian pyramids. Yes, you read that right. Pyramids in Bosnia. It sounds like a headline from a supermarket tabloid. But drive an hour north of Sarajevo, and you'll find a town called Visoko, nestled in a lush valley. And above that town rises a hill so perfectly triangular, so unnaturally symmetrical, it makes your instincts whisper, that's not just geology. They call it the Pyramid of the Sun. And depending on whom you ask, it's either the greatest archaeological discovery of the 21st century or a colossal hoax. Let's lay out the facts. In 2005, researcher Semir Osmanagic proposed that the hill wasn't a hill at all, but a man-made pyramid covered over time by layers of sediment and vegetation. He claimed it aligned with cardinal directions more precisely than the Great Pyramid of Giza, that its sides were made of giant concrete blocks, and that an entire complex of pyramids, moon dragon love, surrounded it in geometric harmony. The academic world did not take it well. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed the claims as pseudoscience. They said it's a natural formation, that Osmanagic's excavation methods were flawed, that it's all wishful thinking and erosion. But visitors keep coming, because when you walk the grounds of Visoko, something doesn't feel ordinary. There are tunnels, thousands of feet of them dug beneath the hill, known as the Ravne tunnels. Carved long ago, no one's quite sure when or why. Inside, researchers have reported air cleaner than the surface. Negative ion counts that defy explanation. Water that seems to have energetic properties. And deep within the labyrinth, stones, massive carved egg-shaped stones, covered in strange runes, some say. Others say resonance devices. Odd fact. In 2012, sound engineers visiting the Pyramid of the Sun's peak detected an ultrasonic beam, a focused energy emission of around 28 kHz rising vertically from the apex. A frequency too high for human hearing, but detectable by machines. Why would a hill be transmitting a beam? Historians and geologists still debate whether the Bosnian pyramids are real. Some dismiss them entirely. Others claim ancient people could not have built such structures without leaving behind cultural evidence. No artifacts, no burials, no cities. But here's the thing, that assumes they were built for the same reasons we build. What if they weren't cities? What if they weren't tombs? What if they were machines? You ever consider that the oldest structures on Earth may not be monuments, but technologies? That they were built to regulate something larger, climate energy consciousness? If so, then maybe the lack of pottery shards and grave goods is the point. Maybe the Bosnian pyramids weren't for the dead. They were for the planet, built not to remember something past, but to stabilize something present. And maybe that's why they were buried, not by weather, but by design, hidden until we were wise or foolish enough to rediscover them. You walk along the imagined base now. The stone beneath your feet isn't ordinary. It vibrates. You feel it in your shins, your knees, your teeth. Not unpleasant, just present. This place is active, like something that's been asleep for a long time but is starting to stretch. What if these pyramids aren't leftovers? What if they're on standby, waiting for the earth to hit a certain resonance again? Waiting for the collective consciousness to remember enough to turn them back on. What would that look like? Storms calming, people dreaming together, diseases vanishing, or maybe something we can't even conceptualize yet. A frequency so harmonious it renders violence impossible. That's what the builders were tuning toward, perhaps. And who were they? That part remains a void. No names, no dates, just shape and intention. The Bosnian pyramids don't give answers. They ask questions you didn't know you needed. What if sacred geometry isn't decorative? What if it's the instruction manual for reality? What if the planet itself has a grid, a neural network, and these sites are the nodes? If so, then Bosnia isn't an anomaly. It's a reactivated memory point. And the reason it makes people uncomfortable because it implies we've forgotten everything. That our ancestors weren't primitive, they were practical. They didn't write books because they built books into the land. And now you're here, standing atop a forgotten chapter, listening to stone hum. The wind shifts. A low vibration rises through your feet. You close your eyes, and you almost hear it. Not a word, a question. Are you ready to remember what the earth was designed to do? Then the feeling fades. The pyramid quiets, but now it's in you. The shape, the hum, the pattern, and you carry it forward. You descend the invisible slope of the Bosnian pyramid, the hum still coiled gently in your chest. You're not walking anymore. You're gliding, slipping between realms that don't quite agree on whether you're dreaming or remembering. And then the air gets colder, not physically, primordially, because now you've arrived at the bottom of the world in every sense. You've entered Antarctica, and not the Antarctica of documentaries and ice core drilling. This is the one that still wears its veil, still keeps secrets, still refuses to melt, no matter how much we dig or scan or dream. Before it was ice, it was something else. And the question has always been what? There's a theory rejected by textbooks, but persistent in whispers, that Antarctica was once home to an advanced civilization, a lush landmass at the bottom of the globe known to ancient sailors not as a white desert, but as Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. This isn't just fantasy. Ancient maps like the Puri Race map, drawn in 1513, depict Antarctica's coastline, not the ice-covered version we know today. The actual landmass underneath, mapped centuries before satellite imaging. How? Where did the source maps come from? And if someone saw Antarctica before it froze, who were they? According to the theory, Antarctica was once part of a temperate supercontinent, Atlantis Lemuria, or Mu depending on who's telling the story. A cradle of pre-flood knowledge, a lighthouse of science and spirit. And when the poles shifted rapidly catastrophically, the land was buried in ice, and the memory of its civilization vanished. Historians call it nonsense, but geologists have found evidence of pollen, even tropical plant fossils beneath Antarctica's glaciers. Fossils of amphibians, too, suggesting that it wasn't always the frozen tomb we know today. And here's the strange part. Satellite images have revealed odd formations, symmetrical, angular, buried beneath miles of ice. Not necessarily cities, but structures, too regular to be chance, too remote to investigate. Access is restricted, military presence is high, and official statements, vague at best. Now step closer. You're no longer imagining a place, you're imagining a presence. Antarctica doesn't just feel empty. It feels occupied by silence, as if something deep beneath the ice is watching. Not maliciously, just waiting. There's a story, told in conspiracy circles, grainy and wild but persistent, that in 1947, the U.S. Navy launched Operation High Jump, a military expedition to Antarctica, under the command of Admiral Byrd. Officially, it was for training. Unofficially, well, the theories spiral. Some say they encountered something. A presence, a technology, an intelligence not of this earth, or perhaps deep within it, something that forced them to retreat quickly. Byrd himself later spoke of flying craft that could travel pole to pole at incredible speeds. He described a vast land beyond the ice. A new kind of enemy, he said. Then the interview stopped. The documents disappeared, and Antarctica was sealed. Some believe Antarctica hides not just ruins, but an entrance. To what? Some say inner Earth. Others say dimensional labs, or even a quarantined power source too dangerous to awaken. But whatever it is, people have been not going there ever since. Odd fact. Under the ice lies Lake Vostok, a freshwater lake sealed beneath 2 miles of ice for over 15 million years. When scientists drilled into it, they expected nothing. What they found was weird. Bacteria that doesn't match known genetics. Hints of complex chemistry. And that's just one lake. Imagine what else sleeps beneath 5.4 million square miles of frozen silence. Antarctica is like the brainstem of the planet. Primitive, powerful, vital, and mostly inaccessible. You walk now across a plain of imaginary snow, not cold, just blank, like unmarked paper waiting for a pen. And beneath your feet, you feel it, not stone, not soil, geometry, not random, not natural, a grid, a machine, something activated only by presence, not machines with gears, machines with intent. You stand at what feels like the center. The silence deepens, and then you realize it's not silence, it's listening. The whole place, the ice, the void, the buried symmetry, it's all awake, not in the way you are, in the way tectonic plates are, in the way planets think. This isn't just forgotten history. This is forgotten function. Antarctica may not hold a lost civilization. It may be one, not made of flesh and cities, but made of structure and stillness. A cold node in Earth's memory circuit, waiting for a signal, and maybe tonight you gave it one. You don't hear a reply, but you feel one, a subtle vibration beneath your sternum, not a warning, a welcome. And then just as softly as it began, the feeling fades, the horizon softens, and Antarctica sleeps again, but not quite the same, because now you remember, and that means it's already begun. The wind from Antarctica doesn't follow you, it lets you go. You step through its threshold like you're crossing out of a cathedral built from silence. There's no fanfare, no door slamming shut, just that feeling in your bones, like something vast just turned a page. And now, the light is different, not golden, not harsh. A soft twilight that doesn't belong to any hour you know, because this is the last place, the place that never existed, and yet somehow existed everywhere. You've arrived at Atlantis. Let's get something out of the way. Everyone thinks they know this story. A rich civilization, advanced beyond its time, destroyed in a single day and night by earthquake and flood. The tale comes from Plato writing around 360 BCE, who said he heard it from his ancestor Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests. According to the priests, Atlantis was real and powerful. Its people had conquered parts of Europe and Africa before succumbing to pride corruption and finally annihilation. Most scholars say Plato invented it, a political parable, an allegory for hubris, a cautionary tale. But here's the thing. Plato never called it a myth. He was precise. Dates, locations, descriptions. He placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, 9,000 years before his time, and for a story he allegedly made up. A lot of people have spent a lot of time trying to prove it wrong. Because Atlantis doesn't behave like fiction. It behaves like a memory, or better yet, a fractured memory, echoing across cultures that never met on continents, separated by oceans and myths too similar to ignore. The Hopi speak of Kaskara, a previous world drowned by pride and water. The Tamil traditions speak of Kumari Kandam swallowed by sea. The Sumerians told of Eridu, the first city washed clean to make room for another. Even the Bible has echoes, the Nephilim, the flood Babel. Atlantis may not be a single place. It may be a syndrome, the echo of a civilization that reached too far. Odd fact. In 2011, satellite images revealed a massive rectangular structure buried beneath the sands of southern Spain in the Doñana wetlands, right where Plato described Atlantis. Excavations were inconclusive. Funding vanished. The story quietly slipped back under the surface, just like the city itself. Historians still argue whether Atlantis was ever real. And if it was it an island, a continent, a lost superpower, a metaphor for all of them? Here's another question. What if Atlantis was never meant to last? What if it was an experiment? A high-frequency civilization, spiritual, scientific, societal, pushed to its absolute limit. A civilization not destroyed by nature, but by feedback. A system that became too efficient, too fast, too powerful, until the only course correction available was total collapse. But collapse isn't the end. It's a transfer. You walk now through imagined halls, marble no, not even stone, something smoother, something luminous. The walls don't reflect light, they remember it. You feel like you're underwater, but you're not wet. The air tastes like clarity. Atlantis isn't a city anymore. It's a field, a resonance still blooming under the ocean in dreams, in DNA. Maybe we didn't lose Atlantis. Maybe we became it, carrying pieces of its memory forward like shards of a forgotten crystal. In our art, our obsessions with symmetry, our yearning to go back to something we can't name. Every time we look at the stars and feel homesick, that's Atlantis whispering. You reach what feels like its heart. Now not a throne room, not a temple, but a quiet, essential pause. And there's no one there, because Atlantis was never about kings or priests. It was about balance, and when balance was lost, the sea answered. But even the ocean isn't erasure, it's storage. The ocean doesn't forget, it holds. You sit down in the quiet, not on a chair, just into the feeling. Like the civilization is a coat you never knew you were wearing. And then like clockwork you remember, not details, not names, a feeling that we were once capable of more. Not more power, more harmony. The Atlanteans didn't fail because they reached too high. They failed because they stopped reaching inward. They tried to perfect the world without remembering the self, and so it fell, not in punishment, in recalibration. Because sometimes the only way to preserve a song is to stop singing it before it turns into noise. And maybe that's what happened. Maybe Atlantis never sank. Maybe it stepped back. Maybe it became the soil under every other civilization. The seed that keeps sprouting no matter how many times we forget how to water it. You open your eyes. No ocean. No ruins. Just stars overhead. But one of them winks. Just one. Like it knows you've been there. And that you're carrying the light forward now. Because Atlantis isn't gone. It's next. You rise from Atlantis, not up, not out, but through. Like surfacing from a deep dream that leaves you breathless and weightless at once. The stories are behind you now, but they don't stay behind. They follow like gravity, like a hum in your ribs, like stars you can't unsee once you've noticed them. And now for the first time you realize you haven't been walking through ruins. You've been walking through a blueprint, each lost civilization, each whisper, each impossible structure and shimmering myth. They weren't disconnected. They were chapters in the same book, a book written not in words, but in resonance. And the final chapter, well, that one's yours. You've reached the threshold of what comes next. This isn't about prophecy. This isn't revelation. This is convergence, the moment all the stories come home and wait to see what you do with them. Because now you know something. You've felt it with every step. These ancient people didn't just build for the sake of building. They didn't carve stones for ego. They weren't trying to rule. They were trying to remember, to preserve, to encode, and above all, to warn, not with fear, with pattern. The patterns were always the message. Circles, spirals, ratios, alignments, frequencies, names that repeat across continents, pillars that hum, stones that glow, temples that don't crumble because they were built to be reactivated. These weren't decorations, they were keys. And here's the lock. Right now, in this moment, you are alive. At the hinge of a new age, and the hum under your feet isn't myth, it's invitation. There's a theory barely whispered, mostly feared, that civilizations don't vanish. They descend, they go inward, into frequency, into the soil, into the bloodlines, into silence, waiting for resonance to return. And when it does, they bloom, not in cities, in people. Odd fact: genetic memory isn't just metaphor. Studies have shown that trauma, instinct, even preferences can be passed on in DNA, that we carry echoes of events we never experienced, responses shaped by hands we never shook, places we never stood but somehow know. What if those aren't just biological artifacts? What if they're pings from the archive? What if the reason you're drawn to these stories is because you were in them? Not literally, but fundamentally. We're taught to think of history as a line, beginning, middle, end. But that's not what the ancients believed. They saw time as a wheel, a spiral, a song, not linear, but layered, each age stacked atop another, like chords in a harmony. And once in a while, the notes align just enough for something to come through, like a whisper between worlds. That's what this has been. Not a bedtime story, a handoff. So what now? You stand in a field that isn't really a field. It's the world as it could be. No structures, no names, just potential. You look around, and you notice the landscape has shifted. It's no longer ancient. It's empty. Not in the sad way, in the ready way. Like someone just cleared the stage and left you the script. No ruins, no myths, just possibility. Because now, it's your turn to build. Not with stone, not with power, with memory, with alignment, with the kind of beauty that hums instead of shouts. You ever feel like you were born for something you can't name? Like this world isn't broken, just unfinished. That's the echo waking up, the signal resent. And you're not a visitor anymore. You're a carrier of story, of shape, of light. And the civilizations you've seen, they're alive in you now. Gobekli Tepe's silence, High Brazil's shimmer, Zep Tepi's pulse, Nan Madol's frequency, Atlantis' heartbreak, all of it. It's heavy, isn't it? But also beautiful. Because maybe the world doesn't need saving. Maybe it needs remembering. Maybe your life isn't about learning what comes next. Maybe it's about restoring what was meant to be. The pyramids aren't the past. They're reminders. The maps aren't mistakes. They're footprints. And the myths, they're manuals. But only if we stop looking at them with tourist eyes. Only if we start listening with the bones. So as you walk away from the last shadow of the last forgotten city, know this: you're not walking away at all. You're walking into the continuation. And the hum, it's with you now. A rhythm, waiting to sync with your footsteps. A story, waiting for your chapter. A civilization that never truly ended. Because it was never about cities. It was about us. There's no gate behind you. No final door to close. Just the horizon softening like a sigh. The journey didn't end. It dissolved. Like mist in morning light, like sound turning into memory. The story doesn't fade because it's over. It fades because now it's inside you. You made it through the flood, myths, through the shimmering ruins, through the stories so strange they refuse to stay buried. And what do you find waiting at the end? Not closure, but coherence. You sit now, not on a throne of forgotten kings, or the altar of a sun god, just somewhere quiet. No ruins, no fog, just a low, infinite hum under your ribs. Familiar, patient, alive. And as you breathe, you begin to see it all differently. Not as puzzle pieces, but as frequency, lines threading through time, looping across oceans, touching stone and bone and fire. Because you've noticed by now, the world's greatest mysteries don't ask to be solved. They ask to be understood. They're not hiding from us. They're waiting for us to tune in. And suddenly, all those impossible things, the singing stones, the flying cities, the temples aligned to stars older than memory, they don't feel impossible. They feel inevitable. Because history doesn't just move forward, it folds, like cloth, like rhythm, like the waves that erased and preserved everything all at once. Atlantis, Zep Tepi, Lemuria, the Shining Ones, the Builders, the Watchers, the Records, the pyramids underwater, and the temples under the stars. None of them were ever truly lost. They just changed form. And tonight that form was you. Odd fact, in every corner of the world, there are words for the ones who remember. In Maori, it's Kaumatua. In the Celtic tongue, Draoi. In Yoruba tradition, the Babalawo. In the Andes, Amauta. All different names, same role. Carriers of pattern, not knowledge for its own sake. Wisdom with weight, and maybe you didn't ask for this. Maybe you just wanted a story to fall asleep to. But the stories, they were awake the whole time, and they saw you, not as a listener, as a relay, someone capable of carrying what others buried. You blink, and something overhead catches your eye. The stars, the same ones who watched when the first mound was raised, when the first temple was carved, when the first flood whispered, "Begin again." They haven't changed. But maybe you have. You know now that history isn't linear. It's relational. Every myth is a bridge. Every ruin is a heartbeat. Every stone circle is a circuit, waiting for someone to walk barefoot through it and hum the note back to life. And here's the secret. You don't need permission to remember. You already do. You don't need a title to align. You already are. You don't need to build the pyramids again. Just resonate with why they were built. Because if this journey taught you anything, it's this. The ancients weren't trying to be remembered. They were trying to remember themselves. And they left you clues. In the geometry of petals. In the echo of waves against forgotten harbors. In dreams that feel like déjà vu. And ruins that feel like reunion. And now, you're the clue, you're the song, you're the last line of the last page and the first line of the next. So what now? You breathe, you settle, and you let the quiet hold you. Because this part, the soft ending, the breath before sleep, the silence after the symphony is important. It's how you integrate. It's how you remember forward. And maybe you'll forget by morning. Maybe the names and places will blur. But the feeling, it will stay. The warmth in your ribs, the rhythm in your walk, the shape of the silence when the lights go out. And that's enough. That's how it begins again. Because the journey wasn't about answers. It was about resonance. And if the world ever asks you what you learned on your way through lost cities and sunken temples and frozen gates, you can smile and say, "Nothing new. I just remembered."